The false dawn gave way to a heavy, overcast morning, the sky pressing down like a leaden shield upon the exhausted city. Gray clouds turned slowly overhead, threatening rain that might either quench the last smoldering fires or turn the plains into a sucking mire for any renewed assault. Orhan Sahib remained upon the tower, his cloak damp with the night's dew and the residue of yesterday's smoke, eyes fixed on the distant ridge where the horde's campfires had dwindled to sullen red eyes in the gloom. The air carried a new tension, thicker than before, a stillness broken only by the occasional distant whinny of horses and the low murmur of prayers rising from the streets below. The captains had gathered once more in the grand chamber, their faces gaunt, eyes hollowed by days without true rest, yet their posture remained unbowed. Orhan stood closest, his shoulder wound freshly rebound, the cloth already darkening again. Faladios paced slowly, fingers tracing the nicks along his blade as if reading the story of every duel etched there. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman leaned against a pillar, spears planted like silent sentinels. Damir Khan sat sharpening arrows with deliberate strokes, the whetstones song a quiet counterpoint to the tension. Tamir Boga and Mustafa bore fresh cuts from the river raids, while Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kuleds, Kilal, Al-Aliaddin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib maintained their vigilant watch over every entrance and shadow. Orhan Sahib descended the stairs with measured steps, the weight of command settling deeper into his frame with every passing hour. "The Almighty has granted us another night of survival," he said, his voice low and rhythmic, carrying the solemn cadence of a man speaking history into being. The horde licks its wounds upon the ridge, their numbers reduced, their spirit tested by fire and the fall of yet another leader. Yet new dust clouds rise beyond them, greater tribes drawn by tales of our stand and the power vacuum left by Shahanshah's death. They do not come for plunder alone, they come seeking to fill the throne with their own shadow. And the northern message, it arrives with the next riders. Alliance or veiled threat, we shall soon know. He unrolled the captured maps once more, tracing lines with the point of his dagger under the flickering lantern light. "We cannot wait for their news to tight. Tarhan, take 800 riders, including the newly sworn northern companies. Circle wide to the northeast under cover of the coming rain. Cut their supply trains, harass their scouts, and spread word among the lesser tribes that justice offers mercy to any who abandon the path of the wolf. Take Zarkin and Kuleds with you, their blades will remind all of the cost of broken oaths. Kilal and Al-Aliaddin Sahib secure the inner defenses in the river, ration water and grain with iron justice so no voice rises in desperation. Jarkata Sahib guard the palace and the granaries, let no hidden agent breathe within these walls. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman hold the western wall and prepare fire traps along the approaches. Damir Khan, train every able citizen who can draw a bow, even a single arrow may turn the tide when numbers press. Tamir Boga and Mustafa range the southern river bends, burn any forward camps they attempt to establish. Faladios and I will lead the central probe tonight. We strike the heart of their ridge camp, sow chaos once more, and force them to choose between flight and costly battle. The orders spread through the city like quiet invocations. As the morning wore into a damp, oppressive afternoon, the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, turning the ground outside the walls into soft, treacherous mud. The horde stirred visibly upon the ridge, riders moving in disciplined columns, banners of new tribes joining their lines, their numbers swelling once again toward 8,000. Yet the rain hindered their mobility, horses slipping in the mire, supply wagons bogging down. Orhan Sahib walked the streets among the people, his presence a living anchor. To a group of weary spearmen he spoke softly, "You have bled beside me in the forest's darkness and the palace's flame. Today the rain itself fights with us, slowing the wolves' charge. Stand firm and the Almighty will turn their strength into burden." To the citizens gathered in the squares he offered reassurance. The tyrant is gone, his gold bought only death. Serve the true path now, and this city shall rise not as a tomb, but as a beacon of justice that outshines every shadow. As twilight deepened and the rain grew heavier, turning the plains into a glistening field of mud and blood, the central probe began. Orhan Sahib and Faladios led 200 elite riders out through a concealed sallyport, moving silently through the downpour. The rain masked their approach, muffling hoofbeats and cloaking their movements in gray curtains. They struck the horde's central camp with sudden, savage fury, torches sputtering to life despite the rain, arrows whistling through the deluge, blades flashing in the brief, lightning-lit chaos. Close quarters fighting erupted amid the sodden tents. Faladios carved a path like a storm-given human form, his sword reaping through startled guards as lightning cracked overhead. "Your new chieftains lead you only to more graves," he roared, steel meeting steel in the pouring rain. Orhan Sahib fought at the forefront, his blade a measured instrument of justice, each strike precise and unrelenting. Smoke rose even through the downpour as oil-soaked bundles ignited, creating pockets of hellish orange glow amid the gray torrent. In the heart of the chaos, another fierce personal duel ignited. A newly risen horde chieftain, broad-shouldered and adorned with fresh trophies, charged directly at Orhan Sahib, lance lowered through the rain. Their clash was thunderous. lances splintered on impact, blades sang in the deluge. The chieftain fought with desperate strength, his blows heavy enough to stagger even the sturdiest warrior, but Orhan Sahib moved with the calm discipline of faith, parrying, feinting, and countering with strikes that found every gap. "Your rage serves only the dead," Orhan Sahib declared between ringing blows. In a final, lightning-illuminated exchange, Orhan sidestepped a killing thrust and drove his blade home beneath the chieftain's guard. The man toppled from his horse with a gurgling cry, his fall sending fresh panic rippling through the camp. The probe withdrew as swiftly as it had struck, leaving burning tents and scattered riders in the rain-soaked darkness. The horde's momentum fractured once again, their encirclement delayed by the need to reorganize in the mud and mourn another fallen leader. As the raiding party returned through the sallyport, drenched and bloodied but victorious, the northern message finally arrived. A lone rider under a flag of parley approached the main gate, an envoy from distant powers beyond the steppes, bearing sealed scrolls. He was brought before Orhan Sahib in the grand chamber, water dripping from his cloak onto the marble floor. The envoy knelt, voice steady despite the tension. "Great commander, the powers of the eastern realms have watched your stand. They offer alliance against the remaining horde, their riders in gold, in exchange for trade rights and recognition of your authority over these lands. Yet they warn, refuse, and they may throw their weight behind the wolves to restore balance. The choice is yours before the next dawn." Orhan Sahib regarded the envoy in silence for a long moment, the rain drumming steadily upon the roof like the heartbeat of fate itself. His captains waited, hands near hilts, eyes watchful for any sign of deceit. "The war reaches yet another fork," Orhan Sahib said at last, his voice heavy with the rhythmic gravity of command and prayer. "Alliances offered in silver and steel while the horde gathers strength in the rain-soaked night. We have faced forest ambushes, palace fires, city sieges, personal reckonings, and storms of betrayal from every shadow. Now greater powers circle like vultures, offering help with one hand while hiding daggers in the other. By the will of the Almighty, we will not be swayed by gold or threats. Justice does not bargain with shadows." He turned to his captains, eyes burning with unquenchable resolve. "Prepare the city for whatever choice this dawn brings. Strengthen every wall, every gate, every heart. Send word to the horde under truce once more. Offer mercy to any who lay down arms and swear true oaths. But ready every blade and every prayer. The rain may slow their bodies, but it cannot quench the fire of faith." As the night deepened further and the rain continued its relentless fall, distant horns sounded once more from the ridge, deeper, more ominous, signaling the horde's regrouping and the approach of new tribal banners. The envoy waited in guarded silence for Orhan Sahib's formal reply. The people of the city prayed without cease, their murmurs blending with the drumming rain. Orhan Sahib stood alone for a moment upon the tower once more, gazing out over the darkened plains where fire, smoke, steel, and fate converged once again. "The march does not end," he whispered into the storm. "Through every trial, every betrayal, every flame we walk forward. Let the hordes come. Let the distant powers reveal their true faces. The Almighty sees all, and we, his servants in steel and honor, will meet whatever judgment he decrees with heads high and blades ready." The epic struggle pressed onward into the rain-drenched night, its fire undimmed, its oath unbroken, marching relentlessly toward the next dawn where alliances would be tested, duels fought, and the true cost of justice weighed once more in blood, smoke, and the unyielding will of those who refused to let darkness claim the final word. The war continued, vast, sacred, and unforgiving, its next chapter written in the falling rain, the clash of steel, and the quiet, unbreakable prayers of men who had chosen the path of honor above all else. The rain fell in relentless silver sheets, turning the plains into a vast, treacherous sea of mud that sucked at hooves and boots alike. Thunder rolled across the darkened sky like the distant laughter of unseen gods, while lightning occasionally split the gloom, illuminating the ridge where the horde's campfires struggled against the downpour. Orhan Sahib stood motionless upon the tower, rain streaming down his face and soaking his cloak until it clung to his armored frame like a second skin. The city below lay shrouded in a wet haze, lanterns flickering weakly along the battlements, the sounds of hammers and shovels muffled by the constant drumming of water upon stone and earth. His captains had gathered once more in the grand chamber, water pooling at their feet, faces drawn and pale in the lantern light. Orhan stood like an iron sentinel, fresh rain mixing with the blood that still seeped from his shoulder. Valadios leaned against a pillar, his blade resting across his knees, eyes burning with the same unquenched fire that had carried him through every duel and every breach. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman bore the weight of endless defense upon their shoulders. Damir Khan's fingers moved mechanically over his remaining arrows. Tamir Boga and Mustafa dripped from their latest river ranging, while Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kuleds, Kilal, Al-Alyadin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib maintained their silent vigil over every shadow and corridor. The envoy from the distant eastern powers remained kneeling in the center of the chamber, water dripping from his cloak, waiting for Orhan Sahib's answer with the patience of a man who knew empires hung upon words spoken in such hours. Orhan Sahib descended the final steps and faced the assembly, his voice cutting through the sound of rain like a blade through silk. The Almighty has sent this rain as both veil and test. It slows the wolves upon the ridge and washes the blood from our stones, yet it also hides the movements of greater shadows. The Eastern powers offer alliance, riders, gold, and recognition in exchange for trade routes and oaths of friendship, yet their words carry the scent of calculation. They fear a strong hand upon these lands more than they fear the horde. We will not kneel for silver, nor will we invite new serpents into our house while the old one still writhes. He turned to the envoy, voice steady and resonant with the weight of destiny. Return to your masters with this message. Orhan Sahib does not bargain for justice. The city stands by the will of the Almighty and the blood of the faithful. If your riders come in true friendship without hidden chains, they will be welcomed as brothers in arms. If they come with demands or daggers concealed in silk, they will meet the same fate as Yakid and Shahanshah. The choice is theirs before the next sun sets. The envoy bowed deeply, rose, and was escorted from the chamber under heavy guard. As the doors closed behind him, Orhan Sahib addressed his captains with the slow, rhythmic gravity that had become the heartbeat of their struggle. Tarhin, take 1,000 riders at first light. Circle the northern ridge under cover of the continuing rain. Strike their supply lines, scatter their scouts, and spread word among the lesser tribes that mercy awaits any who abandon the wolf banners. Zarkin and Kuleds ride with you. Let their presence remind all of the cost of false oaths. Kilil and Al-Aliadin Sahib, fortify the inner city and guard the wells. Let no drop be tainted. Jarkata Sahib, your axe remains the shield of the palace and the granaries. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman, hold the western approaches and prepare pits and fire traps in the mud. Damir Khan, every able hand that can draw a string must be ready. Teach the citizens quickly. Tamir Boga and Mustafa, continue ranging the river. Use the rain to mask your movements and burn any forward outposts. Faladios and I will lead the main strike against the ridge camp when the rain is heaviest. We hit them hard, force them to choose between retreat and ruin, and let the storm itself become our ally. The night deepened. The rain intensified, turning the plains into a quagmire that would hinder any large-scale charge by the horde. Under its cover, Tarhan's force slipped out through the northern gate, vanishing into the gray curtain like ghosts. Hours later, distant fires bloomed along the ridge, supply wagons ignited despite the downpour, horses scattering in panic, shouts of alarm carried faintly on the wind. Simultaneously, Orhan Sahib and Faladios led their strike against the central horde camp. 250 riders moved through the rain like shadows given form. Lightning flashes revealed their charge as they slammed into the enemy lines. Chaos erupted once more. Tents collapsed under the weight of mud and steel. Blades flashed in the brief, brilliant glare of thunderbolts. Faladios fought at the forefront, his sword a streak of death amid the deluge, carving through guards and chieftains alike. Your new alliances will not save you from justice, he roared, voice rising above the storm. Orhan Sahib pressed forward beside him, his blade moving with measured, prayer-guided precision. In the heart of the camp, beneath a particularly violent burst of lightning, another fierce duel unfolded. A massive horde warlord, newly elevated and desperate to prove his worth, charged Orhan Sahib with a heavy curved blade. Their clash was elemental, steel ringing against steel, while rain lashed their faces and mud sucked at their boots. The warlord fought with brute, rain-soaked fury, each blow powerful enough to fell lesser men, but Orhan Sahib met every strike with calm discipline. You chased the ghost of a dead tyrant, Orhan Sahib declared between ringing blows. In a final, lightning-illuminated sequence, he parried a crushing overhead strike, spun inside the warlord's guard, and drove his blade deep into the man's chest. The warlord staggered backward, eyes wide with shock, and collapsed into the mud as thunder crashed overhead. The strike achieved its purpose. The horde's camp descended into fresh disorder, their leaders forced to pull riders back from forward positions to contain the chaos and protect what remained of their supplies. The rain continued to fall, turning the battlefield into a swamp that favored defenders and raiders alike. As the raiding parties returned before the night grew too deep, scouts brought critical news. The Eastern Powers' response was already moving, a column of riders approaching from the southeast, their banners neutral for now but their intent unknown. At the same time, the horde upon the ridge began to shift. Some banners broke away, smaller tribes choosing retreat or neutrality after witnessing yet another leader fall and supplies burn. Yet the core remained, hardened warriors who swore to fight to the last rather than accept mercy from the man who had slain their overlords. Orhan Sahib convened his captains one final time before the deepest hours of night. Rain drummed upon the roof like the insistent heartbeat of fate. The chamber was quiet save for the sound of water and the occasional distant roll of thunder. We have bled the beast again, Orhan Sahib said, his voice carrying the slow, rhythmic weight of a man who had walked through fire many times and still carried the flame. Their supplies burn, their leaders fall, their numbers fracture, yet the greater storm gathers, the eastern riders approach, the horde's core hardens in defiance. The rain buys us time, but it cannot last forever. We must decide the shape of the coming dawn, whether to offer one final truce, to strike while they are mired, or to prepare for the siege that may yet swallow us if the eastern powers choose the wrong side. He looked at each captain in turn, Tarhan the shield, Palladios the storm, the others the pillars upon which the reclaimed realm now rested. The war has tested every limit of body and soul. We have faced ambush in ancient woods, flames that consumed palaces and forests alike, sieges that ground stone to dust, personal reckonings that judged traitors by steel, and storms of betrayal from within and without. Through it all, honor has held, faith has endured. Now, as the rain falls and new shadows draw near, we stand ready once more. Orhan Sahib placed his hand upon the hilt of his blade, eyes reflecting the lantern light with unquenchable resolve. Prepare every defense, strengthen every heart, send heralds at first light offering mercy to any who lay down arms and swear true allegiance. But keep every blade sharp and every prayer rising without cease. The Almighty sees the path we walk. Let the hordes, the distant powers, and the lingering shadows of the past witness that justice does not bend, does not break, and does not yield. As the rain continued its endless fall and the first faint gray of another dawn touched the eastern sky, distant horns sounded once more, deeper, more uncertain, carrying the promise of new alliances, new betrayals, and the next great clash that would decide whether the city stood as a beacon of justice or became another tomb upon the plains. The epic struggle pressed onward through the storm, unrelenting, its fire undimmed by rain or blood, marching forward into whatever judgment the heavens had written for this long night of steel, smoke, honor, and fate. The war was not over. It had simply entered its most profound and uncertain chapter, where rain, mud, steel, and the quiet prayers of faithful men would determine whether light or darkness claimed the final dawn. And Orhan Sahib stood ready, blade in hand, heart steadfast, surrounded by brothers who had bled beside him through every trial, prepared to meet whatever came next with the same unbreaking will that had carried them this far. The march of justice continued, slow, heavy, and inevitable, into the rain-soaked dawn that waited just beyond the horizon. The rain had not relented by the time the gray dawn clawed its way across the sky. It fell in steady, heavy sheets that turned the plains into a vast, glistening mire, where every hoofprint became a small grave for momentum, and every wagon wheel sank deeper into the sucking earth. Orhan Sahib stood upon the eastern battlements, water streaming from the edge of his helm, his cloak plastered to his armor like a shroud of lead. Below him, the city moved with the grim rhythm of men who had learned that survival itself was now a form of worship, citizens hauling stones to reinforce breaches, women boiling what little pitch remained, children carrying arrows to the walls with small, determined hands. The captains gathered around him on the wall walk, rain running down their faces and mixing with the sweat and dried blood of endless days. Tarhan stood closest, his shoulder wound bound so tightly the cloth had begun to cut into flesh, yet his eyes remained sharp as ever. Palladios gripped the parapet, knuckles white, his blade never far from reach. Mahmud and Abdulrahman watched the western approaches with the patience of stones. Damir Khan sheltered his remaining arrows beneath a soaked cloak. Tamir Boga and Mustafa bore the marks of another night's river work, their garments heavy with mud and water. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kulads, Kilul, Al-Aliaddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib formed the silent outer ring, their presence a living wall that no shadow could easily pierce. From the southeast, the column of eastern riders had drawn closer during the night, perhaps 2,000 strong, their banners neutral gray and silver, moving slowly through the mud but with disciplined purpose. From the ridge to the east, the horde's camp stirred fitfully, their numbers still formidable. Those smaller tribes had begun to peel away under cover of darkness, choosing survival over a cause that smelled increasingly of defeat. Orhan Sahib raised his hand, and the low murmur of prayers among the defenders fell silent. His voice rose clear and resonant above the drumming rain, carrying the slow, rhythmic cadence of a man who had become the living voice of justice itself. By the name of the most patient, who sends rain to cleanse the earth and trials to refine the soul, we stand once more at the edge of reckoning. The horde weakens but does not break. New powers approach from the southeast, offering friendship wrapped in calculation. The rain slows every charge and hides every movement, yet it cannot wash away the choices that must now be made. We have walked through forest ambushes where arrows whispered death from every tree, through palace halls where fire judged the traitor and the tyrant alike, through sieges that ground stone and wool to dust, through personal duels that weighed the souls of Yaqid and Shahanshah upon the scales of steel. We have faced betrayal from within our own ranks and storms of steel from without. Through every trial, honor has held, faith has endured. Now we face the final test of this long night. He turned first to Tarhan. Take 900 riders at once. Use the rain as your veil. Circle the northern and eastern flanks of the ridge. Burn what supplies remain, scatter their horses, and speak truth to any lesser tribes still camped there. Mercy awaits those who lay down arms and swear upon the holy book. Zarkin and Kuleds ride with you. Their presence will remind all that broken oaths end in fire. Hilal and Al-Aliadin Sahib guard the inner city and the river with unceasing vigilance. Let no poison or spy slip through. Jarkata Sahib, your axe remains the guardian of the palace and the people's grain. Let no shadow breathe within these walls. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman hold the western wall and deepen the mud traps. Let any charge that comes drown in the earth itself. Damir Khan, every bow, every arrow, every hand that can draw must stand ready. The citizens who wish to fight shall be given arms. Tamir, Boga, and Mustafa range the southern river once more. Use the storm to mask your fire arrows and strike their forward scouts. Faladios and I will lead the strike against the heart of their ridge camp when the rain is at its heaviest. We will force them to choose, retreat into the mud, or die where they stand. The orders passed like sacred verses through the ranks. As the morning wore on beneath the ceaseless rain, Turhan's force slipped out through the northern gate, vanishing into the gray curtain like phantoms born of storm and steel. Hours later, fresh columns of black smoke rose along the ridge despite the downpour. Supply wagons and tents ignited, horses stamping in panic. The distant cries of alarm carried faintly on the wind. At the same time, the eastern column drew near enough for heralds to be exchanged under truce. The leader of the Eastern Riders, a tall, silver-bearded commander named Lord Varak, approached under a grey banner and was brought before Urhan Sahib upon the open ground before the main gate, rain streaming from both men as they faced each other. Lord Varak spoke with measured respect. Urhan Sahib, my masters have watched your stand with admiration and caution. We offer 5,000 riders and wagons of grain if you grant us trade rights through these lands and a pact of mutual defense against future threats. Refuse, and we may find common cause with the remnants of the horde to restore balance. The choice rests with you before night falls again. Urhan Sahib regarded him through the rain, voice steady and carrying the weight of unyielding principle. We do not trade justice for grain or steel. The city stands by the will of the Almighty and the blood of the faithful who have bled beside me through forest, flame, and siege. If your riders come as true brothers, without hidden chains or demands upon our sovereignty, they will be welcomed and fed from our own stores. If they come with the shadow of conquest behind them, they will meet the same fate we have shown every betrayer and every wolf. Return to your masters with that truth. The rain washes many things, but it cannot wash away the difference between alliance and subjugation. Lord Varak bowed once, mounted, and rode back toward his column, the rain swallowing his figure as he departed. As the afternoon deepened into sodden twilight, Urhan Sahib and Faladios led their strike against the ridge camp. 280 riders moved through the storm like ghosts, the rain masking every sound. They hit the heart of the horde's position with savage suddenness, torches sputtering to life in sheltered spots, arrows cutting through the deluge, blades flashing in the brief glare of lightning. Chaos swallowed the enemy camp once more. Tents collapsed under the weight of mud and steel. Horses screamed and bolted. Faladios carved a path of retribution, his sword singing its deadly hymn above the roar of rain. Your time of wolves is ending, he roared, steel claiming life after life. In the center of the maelstrom, beneath a violent burst of thunder and lightning, Urhan Sahib faced the last major chieftain still clinging to power, a grizzled warrior who had risen through the deaths of those before him. Their duel unfolded in the sucking mud, blades ringing while rain lashed their faces. The chieftain fought with the desperate strength of a man who saw his world ending, but Urhan Sahib moved with the calm, prayer-guided precision that had carried him through every trial. You chase shadows cast by dead men, Urhan Sahib declared between ringing blows. In a final, lightning-illuminated sequence, he parried a crushing strike, stepped inside the guard, and drove his blade home with unerring force. The chieftain collapsed into the mud with a final, gurgling cry as thunder crashed overhead. The strike achieved its purpose. The horde's core fractured further, banners broke away in greater numbers, smaller tribes choosing flight or surrender rather than continue a war that had become a slow death in the mud. The remaining hardliners pulled back deeper into the ridge, their encirclement plans shattered by fire, rain, and relentless pressure. As the raiding parties returned through the gates before full night, scouts brought the final tidings of the day. Lord Varak's column had halted short of the city, their banners still neutral, awaiting their master's reply to Urhan Sahib's message. The horde upon the ridge was visibly diminished. Perhaps 4,000 remained, their spirit cracked, their leaders fallen one by one. Yet a small, hardened core still flew the wolf skull banners, swearing to fight to the bitter end. Urhan Sahib gathered his captains in the grand chamber as the rain continued its endless drumming upon the roof. Lantern light flickered across weary but resolute faces. The air was thick with the scent of wet wool, oiled steel, and the quiet fire of men who had walked through hell and refused to kneel. We have bled them again, Urhan Sahib said, his voice deep and rhythmic, heavy with the gravity of all they had endured. Their supplies burn even in the storm, their leaders fall like leaves in autumn, their numbers fracture before our eyes. The Eastern powers pause and consider. The rain itself fights beside us, slowing every charge and hiding every righteous strike. We have faced every trial the darkness could devise, ambush in ancient woods, flames that judged traitors and tyrants alike, sieges that tested the soul as much as the stone, personal reckonings that weighed betrayal upon the scales of steel, and storms of shadow from within and without. Through it all, honor has not bent, faith has not wavered. He looked at each man in turn, Tarhan the unbreakable shield, Faladios the storm of justice, the others the pillars upon which the future of the realm now rested. Prepare the city for whatever the next dawn brings. Then heralds at first light offering final mercy to any who lay down arms and swear true allegiance before the Almighty. Strengthen every wall, every gate, every heart, but keep every blade sharp and every prayer rising without cease. The war has tested us beyond measure, yet we endure. Let the remaining wolves, the distant powers, and the lingering ghosts of the past witness that justice does not yield, does not bargain, and does not break. As the night grew deeper and the rain continued its ceaseless fall, distant horns sounded once more from the ridge, fewer, more uncertain, carrying the tremor of a force that sensed its end approaching. From the southeast, Lord Varrac's column remained motionless, their lanterns glowing faintly through the storm, awaiting the decision that would determine whether they became brothers in arms or new enemies upon the plains. Orhan Sahib stood once more upon the tower, rain streaming down his face, gazing out over the darkened landscape where fire, smoke, mud, steel, and fate converged for what felt like the final time. "The march does not end here," he whispered into the storm. "Through every flame, every betrayal, every trial of rain and blood we have walked forward. Let the horde see the truth. Let the distant powers choose wisely. The Almighty sees the path, and we, his servants in honor and steel, will meet whatever judgment comes with heads high and blades ready." The epic struggle pressed onward through the rain-soaked night, its fire undimmed by water or weariness, marching relentlessly toward the dawn that would decide whether justice claimed its final victory or the long war found one last, terrible twist in the gathering light. The city stood defiant, its people praying without cease, its defenders bloodied but unbowed. The war continued, vast, sacred, and unforgiving, its next chapter written in rain, mud, steel, and the quiet, unbreakable will of men who had chosen the path of honor above survival itself. And somewhere in the storm, fate leaned close, listening for the next clash of steel that would write the ending, or the beginning, of this long epic of justice, betrayal, and unyielding faith. The rain continued its merciless descent through the long hours of night and into the next gray morning, as if the heavens themselves sought to wash the land clean of the blood that had soaked it for days. Orhan Sahib remained upon the tower, water cascading from the edges of his helm, his eyes fixed upon the eastern ridge where the remnants of the horde now huddled in sodden misery. Their campfires sputtered weakly against the downpour, fewer and dimmer than before. Banners that had once flown proudly now hung limp and heavy, many of the smaller tribes having slipped away under cover of darkness, choosing the uncertainty of retreat over certain death in the mud. The captains had assembled once more in the grand chamber, their armor and cloaks dripping, faces hollowed by exhaustion yet hardened by the unyielding fire of those who had walked through hell and refused to kneel. Tarhan stood like a pillar of scarred iron, his shoulder wound throbbing visibly beneath fresh bindings. Faladios leaned against the wall, fingers tracing the edge of his blade as if drawing strength from every nick and scar upon it. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman watched the maps with grim focus. Damir Khan counted his dwindling arrows with mechanical precision. Tamir Boga and Mustafa bore the fresh mud and cuts of another night's ranging. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kiluds, Kilal, Al-Aliaddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib maintained their silent, vigilant watch over every entrance and shadow within the palace. Lord Varrac's eastern column remained halted in the distance, their gray and silver banners heavy with rain, lanterns glowing faintly like uncertain stars. No further message had come from them since the previous day's parley. The decision hung in the air like the storm itself, alliance or new threat. Orhan Sahib descended the stairs and faced his brothers, his voice rising clear and rhythmic above the constant drumming of rain upon the roof, carrying the solemn cadence of a man who had become the living embodiment of justice in this long, brutal epic. "By the name of the most merciful, who sends rain to cleanse what fire has scorched and trials to reveal the true metal of men, we stand at the threshold of decision. The horde upon the ridge is broken in spirit if not yet in number. Their leaders have fallen one by one beneath our blades, their supplies burn even in the deluge. Smaller tribes flee into the mist, seeking survival rather than glory in a lost cause. Yet a hardened core remains, those who swear to die rather than accept the mercy we have offered. And the eastern powers wait in silence, their riders poised like a second blade at our flank. We have endured ambush in the ancient forest where arrows whispered from every shadow, flames that consumed both palace and traitor alike, sieges that ground stone and soul to dust, personal reckonings that judged Yakid and Shahansha upon the scales of steel, and storms of betrayal from within and without. Through every trial, honor has not bent, faith has not wavered. Now we face the final test of this long night of rain and blood. He turned first to Tarhan. Take 1,200 riders at first light. Use the rain as your cloak and the mud as your ally. Circle the northern and eastern flanks of the ridge once more. Strike their remaining supplies, scatter their horses, and offer final mercy to any who will lay down arms and swear true allegiance before the Almighty. Zarkin and Kuleds ride with you. Let their presence remind all that broken oaths end only in fire and regret. Hilal and Al-Aliadin Sahib guard the inner city and the river with unceasing watch. Ensure no poison reaches our wells or our hearts. Jarkata Sahib, your axe remains the shield of the palace and the people's remaining grain. Let no hidden blade or whisper of treason breathe within these walls. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman hold the western approaches and deepen every trap in the mud. Let any desperate charge drown before it reaches our stones. Daimir Khan, arm every citizen who wishes to stand. Even a single arrow loosed in faith may turn the final tide. Tamir, Boga, and Mustafa range the southern river bends under the cover of storm. Burn what forward outposts they still hold and disrupt any attempt to link with the eastern column. Faladios and I will lead the decisive strike against the heart of the remaining horde when the rain reaches its heaviest. We will force them to their knees, either in surrender or in death. The orders spread through the city like quiet, sacred commands. As the gray morning wore on beneath the ceaseless rain, Tarhan's force slipped out through the northern gate, disappearing into the gray curtain like specters of justice. Hours later, new pillars of smoke rose along the ridge despite the downpour. Wagons and tents ignited, horses stamping in panic, the distant cries of alarm carried faintly on the wind. At midday, Lord Varak himself approached once more under a flag of truce, riding through the mud to stand before the main gate. He was brought before Orhan Sahib in the open square, rain streaming from both men as they faced each other beneath the gray sky. Orhan Sahib, Lord Varak said, voice steady despite the deluge, my masters have considered your words. They offer true alliance, 5,000 riders, wagons of grain, and no claim upon your sovereignty. If you will but grant us secure trade routes through these lands and a pact of mutual defense against future threats from the steppes. They ask nothing more, refuse, and we will withdraw and leave you to face the remaining wolves alone. The choice is yours before night falls again. Orhan Sahib regarded him through the rain for a long moment, his voice when it came carrying the unyielding weight of principle forged in fire and blood. We accept brotherhood, not chains. If your riders come as true allies, fighting beside us without hidden demands or future claims, they will be welcomed as brothers in arms and fed from our own stores, meager though they are. If any shadow of conquest or control hides behind your offer, it will be met with the same steel we have shown every betrayer before you. Send word to your masters. The rain washes many things, but it cannot wash away the difference between true alliance and veiled subjugation. Lord Varak bowed deeply, mounted, and rode back toward his column through the mud. The eastern riders remained halted, their lanterns glowing faintly as they awaited final instructions from distant powers. As the afternoon deepened into a sodden twilight, Orhan Sahib and Faladios led their decisive strike against the ridge. 300 elite riders moved through the storm like ghosts, the rain masking every sound and movement. They struck the heart of the remaining horde camp with savage, unrelenting fury. Tents collapsed under the weight of mud and steel. Blades flashed in the brief, brilliant glare of lightning. Faladios carved a path of righteous wrath, his sword singing its deadly hymn above the roar of rain and thunder. Your time upon these plains is ending, he roared, steel claiming life after life. In the center of the chaos, beneath a violent burst of lightning and thunder, Orhan Sahib faced the last defiant chieftain of the hardened core, a grizzled, battle-scarred warrior who had sworn to die rather than surrender. Their duel unfolded in the sucking mud, blades ringing while rain lashed their faces and thunder shook the earth. The chieftain fought with the desperate strength of a man who saw the end of his world, but Orhan Sahib moved with the calm, prayer-guided precision that had carried him through every trial of this long war. Your rage serves only ghosts, Orhan Sahib declared between ringing blows. In a final, cataclysmic exchange illuminated by lightning, he parried a crushing strike, stepped inside the guard, and drove his blade home with unerring force. The chieftain collapsed into the mud with a final, gurgling cry as thunder crashed overhead like the judgment of heaven itself. The strike shattered the remaining will of the horde. Banners fell. Warriors threw down their weapons in the mud, some fleeing into the storm, others kneeling in surrender as the truth of their defeat finally broke upon them. The hardened core was no more. As the raiding party returned through the gates before full night, the rain began at last to ease. Scouts brought the final tidings. Lord Varak's column had begun to move forward slowly, their banners now openly friendly, riders cheering as they approached the city walls under the terms of true alliance. The remnants of the horde were broken. Those who survived either surrendered or scattered into the plains. Their threat ended. Orhan Sahib gathered his captains in the grand chamber as the rain finally began to thin. Lantern light flickered across faces that, for the first time in many days, showed the faint light of hard-won victory. "The wolves are broken," Orhan Sahib said, his voice deep and rhythmic, heavy with the solemn joy and lingering vigilance of a man who had led his people through the valley of shadow. "Their leaders have fallen, their numbers have scattered. The rain itself has washed their strength away. The Eastern riders come now as true brothers, bringing grain and steel without chains. We have faced every darkness the world could summon, ambush in ancient woods, flames that judged the traitor and the tyrant, sieges that tested the soul as much as the stone, personal reckonings that weighed betrayal upon the scales of steel, and storms of shadow from every quarter. Through it all, honor has endured, faith has triumphed." He looked at each captain in turn, Tarhan the unbreakable shield, Faladios the storm of justice, the others the pillars upon which a new realm would now be built. "The long war ends not with a single blow, but with the quiet dawn that follows the storm. Let the people rejoice, but remain vigilant, tend the wounded, feed the hungry, bury the fallen with honor, and prepare, for though the wolves are broken, the world beyond these walls still turns, and new shadows may yet gather in distant lands. But for tonight, let every heart know that justice has prevailed." As the rain finally eased into a gentle drizzle and the first true stars began to pierce the clearing sky, the city stirred with cautious, tearful joy. Cheers rose faintly from the streets. Prayers of thanksgiving mingled with the sound of water dripping from the battlements. Lord Varak's riders approached the gates under friendly banners, their wagons of grain a visible promise of new beginnings. Orhan Sahib stood once more upon the tower, looking out over the darkened plains where fire, smoke, mud, steel, and fate had clashed for so long. The war, that vast, sacred, unforgiving epic, had at last reached its hard-won conclusion upon these blood-soaked fields. Yet even in victory he felt the quiet pull of destiny. The march of justice did not end with one battlefield. It continued onward into the rebuilding of the city, the forging of new alliances, and the eternal vigilance against whatever shadows the future might bring. "The story does not close here," he murmured into the clearing night. "It merely turns the page. Through every flame, every betrayal, every trial of rain and blood, we have walked forward with honor. Let the world remember what was won upon these plains, not by numbers or gold, but by faith, by steel, and by the unbreaking will of men who refused to let darkness claim the final word." And so the long epic drew toward its close beneath the emerging stars, a tale of forest ambushes and palace fires, of sieges and duels, of betrayal and redemption, of smoke and steel and the quiet triumph of justice. The city stood victorious, its people safe, its walls scarred but standing, its commander and captains bloodied but unbroken. The war was over. Yet the greater story, the story of honor, faith, and the eternal march of justice, continued onward into the new dawn, ready to face whatever trials the Almighty might yet decree for the realm that had been reclaimed in fire and blood. The night deepened peacefully for the first time in many days. Prayers rose unceasing. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried the faint promise that this hard-won peace would be guarded with the same unyielding resolve that had won it. The epic had reached its end for now. The rain had softened to a gentle mist by the time the first true light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, painting the scarred plains in soft hues of rose and gold. The mud still clung heavily to the earth, but the worst of the deluge had passed, leaving behind a cleansed yet weary landscape where the remnants of war lay exposed, broken banners half buried in the mire, abandoned lances rising like forgotten prayers, and the distant ridge now silent save for the occasional call of scavenging birds. Orhan Sahib stood upon the highest tower of the palace, his cloak still damp but no longer heavy with storm. For the first time in many days he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. Below him the city stirred with the slow, careful rhythm of rebirth. Citizens moved through the streets, clearing debris, tending to the wounded in the great halls, and sharing what meager food remained with quiet gratitude. Children ran between the legs of warriors, their laughter a fragile but precious sound after so much silence and steel. The air carried the clean scent of rain-washed earth mixed with the lingering trace of smoke, a reminder that victory had been purchased at a terrible price. His captains gathered around him on the tower platform, their faces still etched with exhaustion but now softened by the first faint light of peace. Tarhan stood at his right hand as always, the wound on his shoulder bound tightly, yet his posture remained that of an unbreakable guardian. Faladios leaned against the parapet, his blade sheathed for the first time in what felt like an age, though his eyes still scanned the horizon with habitual vigilance. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman stood shoulder to shoulder, their spears planted like banners of endurance. Damir Khan rested his bow across his knees, counting the last of his arrows with a quiet smile. Tamir Boga and Mustafa bore the mud and cuts of their final river raids with quiet pride. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kulud's Kilil Al-Alyadin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib completed the circle, each man a pillar that had held the realm together through fire and shadow. Lord Varak's eastern riders had reached the main gate during the night. True to their word, they came not as conquerors but as allies, 5,000 strong, with wagons laden with grain, dried meat, and bundles of fresh arrows. Their banners flew openly beside the crescent of Arhan Sahib's forces, and their commander had already knelt in the square, swearing brotherhood before the gathered captains and people. Arhan Sahib turned to face his brothers, his voice rising clear and resonant through the morning mist, carrying the slow, rhythmic cadence of a man who had walked through the valley of death and emerged to speak the truth of what had been won. By the grace of the most compassionate, who sends rain to cleanse the earth and trials to reveal the strength of faithful hearts, the long night has passed. The wolves that once howled upon the ridge have scattered or knelt. Their leaders lie cold in the mud where justice claimed them, Yakid in the forest ashes, Shahansha upon his own throne, and every chieftain who rose after them beneath our blades in fire, smoke, and storm. The Eastern brothers have come not with chains but with open hands, bringing grain for the hungry and steel for the vigilant. The city stands, its walls are scarred but unbroken, its people live, and honor, true, unyielding honor, has prevailed where betrayal and gold once sought to rule. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle over them all, the mist curling gently around their armored forms like the breath of history itself. We have faced every darkness this world could summon against us. Ambush in the ancient forest where arrows whispered death from every shadow. Flames that consumed both palace halls and the traitor's soul. Sieges that ground stone and will alike beneath their weight. Personal reckonings in which steel judged the faithless. Yakid's betrayal ended by Faladios's hand. Shahansha's tyranny ended upon the steps of his own throne. Storms of steel and shadow from every quarter, betrayal from within our own ranks, hordes that numbered 10,000 strong, and even the rain itself turned into both veil and weapon. Through every trial we did not bend, we did not bargain, we did not yield. By the will of the Almighty we endured. Arhan Sahib looked at each man in turn, his gaze heavy with gratitude and the quiet bond forged in blood. Tarhan, my shield, who intercepted death so many times that your body tells the story of loyalty deeper than blood. Faladios, my storm, whose blade ended rivalries and tyrants alike with righteous fire. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman, whose spears held the walls when the world sought to break them. Damir Khan, whose arrows darkened the sky and thinned the tide when numbers threatened to overwhelm us. Tamir Boga and Mustafa, whose river raids struck like lightning in the darkness. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kulud's Kilil Al-Alyadin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib, whose vigilance guarded the heart of the city while the storm raged outside. And all the brave souls who fought beside us, the turned riders who redeemed themselves in blood, the citizens who carried stones and arrows when strength failed, the wounded who refused to leave the walls. Every one of you is a witness that justice does not die easily. A soft cheer rose from the streets below as word spread, not the wild roar of conquest, but the deep, grateful sound of a people who had survived the abyss and now saw light breaking through. Arhan Sahib continued, his voice growing warmer yet still carrying the solemn rhythm of history unfolding. Today we begin the greater work. The walls must be repaired, the granaries filled, the wounded tended, the fallen buried with full honor beneath the crescent banner. Lord Varak's riders will be welcomed as brothers, their grain shared equally, their blades given place beside ours should new shadows ever rise. But we will remain vigilant. The world beyond these plains still turns. New powers may yet test us, old wounds may yet fester. Yet we have proven that when faith and honor stand together, no horde, no tyrant, no storm of betrayal can prevail. He raised his hand toward the rising sun, the mist beginning to burn away as golden light spilled across the city and the blood-soaked fields. Let the people rejoice this day. Let prayers of thanksgiving rise without cease. Let every heart know that what was won here was not merely a city or a battle. It was the soul of a realm reclaimed through fire, smoke, steel, and unbreaking will. The long war ends, the long peace begins, and we who walked through the darkness together will guard it with the same resolve that carried us through every trial. As the sun climbed higher and the mist lifted fully, revealing the plains where the last remnants of the horde had scattered or surrendered, the city came alive with the sounds of victory tempered by reverence. Bells rang from the surviving towers, people embraced in the streets. Warriors lowered their blades and embraced their brothers. Lord Varak's riders entered the gates in orderly columns, greeted with bread and water as a sign of true alliance. Arhan Sahib descended from the tower with his captains, walking among the people as the first true light of peace bathed the city. He stopped often to lay a hand upon a wounded man's shoulder, to accept a child's small gift of wild flowers, to speak quiet words of thanks to those who had fought and bled beside him. In the grand square before the palace, he raised his voice one final time so that all could hear. This victory belongs not to me alone, but to every soul who stood when standing seemed impossible, to the faithful who prayed through the darkest nights, to the brave who charged into fire and smoke without hesitation, to the Almighty who guided our blades and strengthened our hearts. Let this day mark not the end of struggle, but the beginning of a realm built upon justice, honor, and faith. The forest has been crossed, the palace has been cleansed, the siege has been broken, the storm has passed. Now we build what was nearly lost, stronger, wiser, and ever mindful that darkness may one day return, but when it does, it will find us ready, as we have always been. The cheer that rose then was deeper and more profound than any battle cry, the sound of a people who had stared into the abyss and chosen light. As the sun climbed toward its zenith and the mist burned away completely, revealing a land washed clean by rain and consecrated by blood, Orhan Sahib stood with his captains upon the steps of the palace. Tarhan at his right, Faladios at his left, the others arrayed behind like the unbreaking foundation of a new dawn. The long epic of war had reached its close. Yet the greater story, the eternal story of honor, faith, justice, and the quiet, unyielding march of those who refused to let darkness prevail, continued onward into the bright morning that now stretched before them. The city lived. The realm endured. And somewhere in the distance, the wind carried the promise that this hard-won peace would be guarded with the same fire, the same steel, and the same unbreakable will that had won it beneath the smoke and rain of so many terrible nights. The war was over. But the legacy of those who fought it, Orhan Sahib, Tarhan, Faladios, and every soul who stood beside them, would echo through the ages like the final, triumphant note of a prayer answered. And as the sun shone fully upon the reclaimed city, the long night of steel and shadow finally gave way to the dawn of justice. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last veils of mist until the plains lay open and glistening beneath a sky finally cleared of storm. The city of reclaimed stone and scarred walls stood bathed in golden light, its people moving with the slow, reverent steps of those who had survived the end of the world and awakened to find it still turning. Orhan Sahib remained upon the palace steps, flanked by his captains, watching as Lord Varak's eastern riders entered the main gate in orderly columns. Their wagons creaked under the weight of grain and supplies, and their banners, gray and silver, now flew alongside the crescent emblem of justice that had flown through fire and rain. The square filled with cautious joy. Warriors lowered their weapons for the first time in many days, embracing brothers who had fought beside them through forest ambushes and palace flames. Citizens brought what little they had: loaves of bread, pitchers of water, wildflowers gathered from the edges of the mud, and laid them at the feet of the defenders. Children darted between the legs of horses, their laughter rising like fragile incense after so many nights of prayer and steel. Wounded men, carried upon litters, lifted their hands in thanksgiving as the first true light of peace touched their faces. Orhan Sahib raised his hand, and the growing murmur of the crowd fell into respectful silence. His voice carried across the square, deep and rhythmic, heavy with the solemn weight of all they had endured and all they had won. By the grace of the Most Merciful, who turns the darkness of night into the light of dawn and the fury of storm into the calm after rain, the long war has ended. The wolves that once howled upon the ridge have scattered like leaves before the wind. Their chieftains lie in the mud where justice claimed them, one by one, beneath blades guided by faith and honor. Yakut's betrayal ended in the forest ashes. Shahanshah's tyranny ended upon the steps of his own throne. Every warlord who rose after them met the same fate in fire, smoke, rain, and steel. The horde that numbered 10,000 strong is no more. What remains has either knelt or fled into the plains, never to threaten these lands again. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over the gathered people, warriors, citizens, the wounded, the children, and the newly arrived eastern riders who stood in respectful silence. We have walked through every trial the shadows could devise. Ambush in the ancient forest where arrows whispered death from every tree and root. Flames that consumed both palace and trader alike, turning the night into a furnace of judgment. Sieges that ground stone and soul beneath their relentless weight. Personal duels in which steel weighed the souls of the faithless, Faladios ending Yakut's treachery, my own blade ending Shahanshah's rule. Storms of betrayal from within our own ranks and from without, wavering garrisons, poisoned daggers in the dark, and hordes that sought to drown us in numbers. Through forest and flame, through mud and rain, through smoke and steel, honor did not bend, faith did not waver, the Almighty saw our oaths and granted us endurance. Orhan Sahib turned first to his closest brothers, his voice softening with the depth of shared blood and shared suffering. Tarhan, my right hand, my living shield, who intercepted death so many times that your scars tell the story of loyalty deeper than any oath. Faladios, whose blade became the storm of justice, ending rivalries old and new with righteous fire. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman, whose spears held the western wall when the world itself seemed determined to break it. Damir Khan, whose arrows darkened the sky and thinned the tide when numbers threatened to overwhelm us. Tamir Boga and Mustafa, whose river raids struck like lightning even in the heaviest rain. Altadin Sahib, Zarkan, Kilad's Kilal, Al-Alyadin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib, whose vigilance guarded the heart of the city while chaos raged outside. And every soul who stood with us, the turned riders who redeemed themselves in blood, the citizens who carried stones and arrows when strength failed, the wounded who refused to leave the walls. You are the reason this city still stands. You are the reason justice prevailed. A deep, heartfelt cheer rose from the square, not the wild roar of conquest, but the profound sound of a people who had stared into the abyss and chosen light. Tears mingled with smiles. Prayers of thanksgiving rose like smoke from 1,000 hearts. Orhan Sahib continued, his voice gaining warmth yet never losing its solemn rhythm. Today we begin the greater work that victory demands. The walls must be rebuilt stronger than before, the granaries filled and shared equally, the wounded tended with mercy, the fallen buried with full honor beneath the crescent that flew through every storm. Lord Varak and his eastern brothers are welcome not as strangers but as true allies. Their grain will feed the hungry, their riders will stand beside ours should new shadows ever rise, but we will remain vigilant. The world beyond these plains still turns. New powers may test us in years to come, old wounds may yet try to fester, yet we have proven upon these blood-soaked fields that when faith and honor stand together, no horde, no tyrant, no storm of betrayal can prevail. He stepped forward, raising both hands toward the sun now fully risen above the city. Let this day be remembered not as the end of struggle alone, but as the birth of a realm built upon justice, mercy, and unbreaking faith. Let every heart know peace this day. Let every prayer rise in thanksgiving. Let every soul who fought, from the lowliest spearmen to the captains who stood at my side, be honored as the guardians of this new dawn. The forest has been crossed, the palace has been cleansed, the siege has been broken, the storm has passed. Now we build what was nearly lost, stronger, wiser, and ever mindful that darkness may one day return, but when it does, it will find us ready as we have always been. The cheer that followed was deeper and more profound than any battle cry ever raised upon those walls. It rolled across the square, through the streets, and out toward the plains where the last remnants of war lay silent beneath the sun. Warriors embraced, families reunited, Eastern riders dismounted and shared bread with the defenders who had once faced them as potential enemies. As the sun climbed toward its zenith, Orhan Sahib walked among his people with his captains at his side. He stopped often to lay a hand upon a wounded warrior's shoulder, to accept a child's gift of wildflowers, to speak quiet words of thanks to those who had bled beside him through forest, flame, and rain. In the grand square, Lord Varak knelt once more, swearing formal brotherhood before the gathered assembly. The long epic of war had reached its hard-won close. Yet the greater story, the eternal story of honor, faith, justice, and the quiet, unyielding march of those who refused to let darkness prevail, continued onward into this bright new morning. The city lived. The realm endured. And the legacy of Orhan Sahib, Tarhan, Faladios, and every soul who stood with them would echo through the ages like the final, triumphant verse of a prayer answered after the longest night. As the sun shone fully upon the reclaimed lands, the long night of steel and shadow finally gave way to the dawn of justice. The war was over. But the light they had defended, the light of honor and faith, would burn on, steady and unquenchable, guarding the future they had bled to secure. And somewhere on the wind, carried across the cleansed plains, came the quiet promise that this peace, hard-won through fire, smoke, rain, and steel, would be cherished and protected by the same unbreakable will that had won it beneath the storms of so many terrible nights. The epic had ended. Yet its spirit marched forward into the days of rebuilding, into the years of vigilance, and into the eternal story of men who chose justice when the world offered only shadow. Peace had come at last to the city beneath the crescent. And with it, the dawn of a new chapter written not in blood, but in the quiet, enduring light of honor restored. In the velvet blackness of a night that swallowed the world whole, where the moon hid its face behind curtains of storm clouds and the wind whispered secrets through the ancient oaks, Orhan Sahib stood motionless upon the crest of a shadowed ridge. His cloak, heavy with the dew of the forest floor and stained by the dust of 100 marches, stirred faintly as if the spirits of fallen warriors tugged at its hem. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and distant smoke, the kind that clung to the throat like a promise of fire yet to come. Around him, the camp lay in disciplined silence, hundreds of men, their armor dulled by soot and night, their horses tethered with ropes woven from the hides of beasts slain in earlier skirmishes. Orhan Sahib's hand rested upon the hilt of his curved blade, its edge honed by the prayers of holy men and the blood of traitors. "Allah, the compassionate, the merciful," he murmured into the void, his voice low and resonant, carrying no further than the ears of Tarhan, who stood ever at his right hand like a shadow forged in steel. "Grant us justice this night, or let the earth drink our blood as witness to our honor." The forest stretched before them like a living beast, its branches clawing at the sky, its undergrowth a maze of roots and thorns that had already claimed the lives of scouts foolish enough to venture alone. Orhan Sahib knew the tales of this wood, how it had swallowed armies whole in the days of his fathers, how the leaves themselves seemed to conspire with the wind to betray the movements of men. Yet here in this darkness lay their path to retribution. Shahanshah, that serpent upon the throne of gilded lies, had poisoned the wells of alliance with whispers of gold and false oaths. His banners flew over lands that once bowed to the true faith, and now his spies infested every village, every caravan route. But worse, far worse, was the rot within. Yaqid, once a brother in arms, now a shadow of betrayal whose name Orhan Sahib could scarcely utter without tasting ash upon his tongue. Yaqid had sold his soul for the promise of power, turning his blade against those who had bled beside him under the same crescent moon. Tarhan shifted beside him, his elite frame coiled like a bowstring drawn taut for the kill. A swordsman without peer, Tarhan had intercepted arrows meant for Orhan Sahib's heart in battles long past, his body a living shield etched with scars that told stories of loyalty deeper than blood. "Orhan Sahib," he said, his voice a gravelly oath in the night, "the scouts return. Faladio's reports movement. Shahanshah's vanguard cuts through the eastern thicket, their torches like dying stars. They seek to flank us before dawn." Orhan Sahib's eyes narrowed, scanning the tree line where faint glimmers flickered like the eyes of wolves. "Then we become the wolves." Tarhan, signal the captain. Damir Khan to the left ridge with his archers. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman to hold the center with the spearmen. Tamir Boga and Mustafa will circle wide through the brambles, no fires, no sound. Altuddin Sahib take the rear guard and watch for the traitor's hand. "Zarkan Kulad's Killil, your blades will taste first blood tonight." As the orders passed like silent prayers through the ranks, the night deepened further, the air growing heavier with the weight of impending steel. Orhan Sahib mounted his stallion, its flanks quivering with the same restrained fury that burned in his chest. They moved as one, a tide of shadow and resolve, boots sinking into moss that muffled every step. The forest closed around them, branches snagging at cloaks and scraping against mail like the fingers of the damned. Hours passed in that slow, rhythmic march, each man reciting verses from the holy book under his breath, invoking the name of the Almighty to steel their hearts against fear. "By the honor of the Prophet," whispered Al-Aliaddin Sahib to the man beside him, "we fight not for land alone, but for the light that Shahanshah seeks to snuff out." Jarkata Sahib, ever the quiet one with eyes like polished obsidian, merely nodded and tightened his grip on his axe, its head wrapped in cloth to silence the metal's voice. Deeper into the wood they pressed, until the first ambush erupted like thunder from a clear sky. Arrows hissed from the undergrowth, Shahanshah's hidden bowmen, their positions betrayed by the faint crack of a twig underfoot. One shaft whistled toward Orhan Sahib's throat, but Tarhan was there in an instant, his sword flashing upward to shatter at mid-flight, splinters raining like cursed rain. "Ambush!" roared Tarhan, and the forest exploded into chaos. Close quarters fighting swallowed the night whole. Steel rang against steel, the clash echoing off ancient trunks as men grappled in the gloom. Damir Khan's archers loosed volleys from the ridge, their strings singing a deadly hymn that felled riders in the enemy column. Mahmud charged forward with Abdul Rahman at his side, their spears thrusting into the press of bodies, blood slicking the leaves underfoot. "For Orhan Sahib, for justice!" they cried, voices raw with the fire of belief. Yet the enemy was no rabble. Shahanshah's forces, desperate and well-armed, pushed back with the ferocity of cornered beasts. Torches were thrown into the dry brush, and soon flames licked upward, casting grotesque shadows that danced like demons upon the trees. Smoke billowed thick and acrid, choking the lungs and turning the battlefield into a haze of confusion. Orhan Sahib wheeled his horse through the inferno, his blade carving arcs of retribution. He saw Tamir Boga fall to a lance thrust, only for Mustafa to avenge him with a roar that split the night. Altuddin Sahib held the rear as ordered, his men forming a wall of shields against the flanking riders who sought to cut their retreat. Zarkan and Kulids fought back to back, their swords a whirlwind that hewed through mail and bone alike. Killil, wounded yet unyielding, dragged a fallen comrade from the flames, muttering oaths of vengeance. In the heart of this maelstrom, psychological warfare wove its venomous thread. Messengers from Shahanshah's lines, captured and bound, were dragged before Orhan Sahib, their eyes wide with the terror of impending judgment. One, a trembling lieutenant, spat words laced with the traitor's poison. "Yaqid sends word your cause is dust. Join the Shahanshah or watch your brothers burn as he has burned villages in your name." Orhan Sahib's face remained a mask of granite, but inside the words clawed at the wound of betrayal. "Tell your false king," he replied, voice steady as forged iron, "that honor is not bought with gold, nor loyalty forged in lies. Yaqid will answer to the scales of fate before this night ends." The messenger was released, arrowless and broken, to carry the message back, a seed of doubt sown in the enemy's ranks, for even the most hardened soldiers whispered of Yakid's treachery now, wondering if their own blood would be the next price for a ruler's desperation. The smoke thickened as the fires spread, turning the forest into a furnace of judgment. Orhan Sahib pressed the advantage, ordering encircling maneuvers that cut the enemy's supply lines like a blade through silk. Turhan lead the charge on the right, Faladios hold the left and await my signal. Burhan Faladios, fierce commander, his rivalry with Yakid a blade sharpened by years of slights and stolen glories, nodded once, his eyes burning with a hatred that needed no words. Faladios was no mere soldier. He was a storm given human form, his armor scarred from duels that had decided the fates of lesser men. He had clashed with Yakid before in the training yards of their youth, where honor demanded blood but mercy had stayed the final blow. Tonight, mercy would not linger. As the encirclement tightened, the chaotic press of bodies funneled toward a clearing where the flames had devoured the undergrowth, leaving a charred arena lit by hellish orange glow. There, at the center of the inferno, Yakid emerged like a ghost from the smoke, his banner tattered, his face twisted by the weight of his own choices. He rode at the head of a desperate knot of Shahanshah's elite, his sword already crimson. Orhan Sahib, he bellowed across the blaze, voice cracking with the strain of false defiance. This war ends here, your justice is a child's dream, but Orhan Sahib held back, sensing the deeper play. Faladios, take him, show him the face of consequence. Faladios dismounted in a single fluid motion, his boots crunching upon the blackened earth. The two rivals circled in the firelight, the roar of battle fading to distant thunder as all eyes turned to this personal reckoning. Yakid lunged first, his blade whistling in a wide arc born of rage and fear. Faladios parried with contemptuous ease, the clash of steel sending sparks dancing into the night like forbidden stars. You sold your oath for shadows, Yakid, Faladios growled, his voice cutting through the crackle of flames. Now taste the steel of those you betrayed. Yakid pressed the attack, desperation fueling blows that Faladios met with calculated fury, each deflection a lesson in honor lost, each counter a promise of justice served. Smoke swirled around them, blinding and choking, yet the duel burned brighter. Yakid's foot slipped upon a smoldering root. Faladios seized the moment, driving his pommel into the traitor's ribs with a crack that echoed like breaking faith. Yakid staggered, blood flecking his lips, but he rose again, swinging wildly. The Shahanshah will crush you all, he spat. In a final, cataclysmic exchange, Faladios fainted left, then drove his blade upward in a thrust born of years of rivalry. The steel pierced Yakid's guard and found the gap beneath his armor, sinking deep. Yakid's eyes widened in shock, the firelight reflecting the death of his illusions. He clutched at the wound, gasping, "Fate has judged," before collapsing into the ash. Faladios stood over him, breathing hard, and wiped his blade upon the traitor's cloak. As it always does, he whispered, then turned back to the fray, the duel's end igniting a renewed surge in Orhan Sahib's forces. The turning point came with the fire itself. Shahanshah's own torches, meant to burn them out, now backfired as the wind shifted, driving flames into his lines and sowing panic. Men screamed as their cloaks ignited, horses reared and bolted, breaking formations that had held for hours. Orhan Sahib seized the chaos, ordering a full press. Tarhan led the vanguard like an avenging angel, his sword reaping a harvest of despair. Daimir Khan's arrows found their marks in the fleeing backs, while Mahmud and Abdul Rahman drove the center forward, their spears a forest of death. Tamir Boga, risen from his wound with Mustafa's aid, roared commands that rallied the weary. Altadin Sahib secured the captured supplies, wagons of grain and powder now turned against their former owners. Zarkin, Kulad's Kilul and Al-Aliuddin Sahib formed the hammer that crushed the remnants, Jarkata Sahib's axe delivering the final blows to those who refused surrender. By the time the eastern sky bled the first gray of false dawn, the forest lay conquered, its floor a carpet of broken banners and silenced foes. Shahanshah's vanguard was shattered, their supplies severed, their morale a ruin of smoke and regret. Orhan Sahib rode through the aftermath, his gaze sweeping the field where his captains gathered, Turhan wiping blood from his brow, Faladios standing tall with the weight of victory upon his shoulders, the others bloodied yet unbroken. We have cut the serpent's coil, Orhan Sahib declared, voice carrying over the dying crackle of flames, but the head still writhes in its den. Shahanshah flees toward his walls, no doubt weaving new lies to bind his crumbling throne. We march at first light, encircle his city, starve his gates, let the people within see the truth of his betrayal. Yet as the men began the grim work of tending wounds and gathering the fallen, a lone rider burst from the southern tree line, horse lathered and eyes wild. It was a scout from the outer patrols, gasping as he reined in before Orhan Sahib. Orhan Sahib, word from the frontier. Shahanshah has not fled alone. He rides to forge a darker pact. Riders from the eastern hordes answer his call, drawn by promises of plunder and the traitor's gold. Their banners number twice our own, and they move under cover of the next moonless night. Tarhan's hand tightened on his hilt. Faladios exchanged a glance with Orhan Sahib, the fire's embers still glowing in their eyes. The commander rose in his stirrups, the wind now carrying the distant rumble of thunder that mirrored the storm yet to break. Orhan Sahib looked to the horizon, where the forest gave way to open plains and the silhouette of distant walls. "Then let them come," he said, the words heavy with the gravity of fate. "We have faced shadows and fire, betrayal and steel. Allah witnesses our path. The war is not ended this night. It merely sharpens its blade for the siege that will define us all. Gather the captains. We ride not to rest, but to destiny." And as the first true light of dawn pierced the smoke, the army stirred once more, a tide of honor and steel marching forward into the unknown, the forest's ghosts whispering behind them that greater fires awaited, and the true test of loyalty had only just begun. The first rays of dawn clawed through the thinning smoke like the fingers of a reluctant judge, painting the charred forest in hues of blood and gold. Orhan Sahib sat motionless upon his stallion, the beast's flanks still heaving from the night's fury, while the remnants of the battlefield lay silent around him. Broken spears protruding from the earth like accusing fingers, discarded shields half buried in ash, and the bodies of friend and foe alike locked in their final embrace. The air tasted of iron and regret, heavy with the metallic tang of spilled blood that no wind could yet carry away. His captains gathered close, their faces etched with the exhaustion of men who had danced with death and emerged scarred but unbowed. Orhan stood at his right, ever the silent sentinel, a fresh cut across his cheek, weeping slowly as if the forest itself mourned. Orhan Faladios wiped the last traces of Yakid's blood from his blade, his eyes distant, the weight of that personal reckoning still burning in his chest like an unquenched ember. Daimir Khan, Mahmud, and Abdul Rahman leaned upon their weapons, breathing in ragged unison, while Tamir Boga and Mustafa tended to the wounded with quiet efficiency. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kulads, Kilal, Al-Aliaddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib formed a protective ring, their gazes scanning the tree line for any lingering threat. "By the mercy of the All-Seeing," Orhan Sahib intoned, his voice low and resonant, carrying the gravity of command and the fire of faith, "we have survived the night's trial. Yakid's betrayal has been answered in steel and flame, yet the serpent Shahanshah coils still in his distant halls, whispering new poisons to the winds. He calls upon eastern hordes, barbarians lured by gold and the promise of easy slaughter. Their numbers swell like a storm upon the horizon, but we shall not cower. We march now, not in haste, but with the deliberate stride of justice. Cut their supply lines further. Encircle the walls of his stronghold before his new allies can join the fray. Let the people within those gates witness the emptiness of his oaths." The army stirred as one, a vast serpent of men and horses uncoiling from the forest's edge into the open plains that stretched toward Shahanshah's domain. The march began under a sky that threatened rain, the ground soft beneath their boots from the previous night's dew mixed with blood. Hours passed in rhythmic cadence, boots thudding against the earth, the creak of leather harnesses, the occasional snort of a warhorse sensing the tension in the air. Orhan Sahib rode at the head, flanked by Turhan and Faladios, their conversation sparse but weighted with strategy. "The city lies 2 days' hard ride from here," Turhan observed, his voice a steady rumble. "Its walls are thick, built by the hands of slaves and fortified with the bones of the conquered. Water flows from the northern river, guarded by outposts. We must sever that lifeline first." Faladios nodded, his rivalry-forged resolve hardening his features. "And the eastern approaches open ground, perfect for ambush. If the hordes arrive, they will seek to crush us against those stones. We strike before they unite." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows that danced like specters across the grasslands, scouts returned with grim tidings. Shahanshah had not been idle. His remaining forces had retreated behind the massive stone walls of his capital, a fortress city rising like a defiant fist from the plains, its towers crowned with banners that fluttered mockingly in the breeze. Smoke rose from within, not the chaos of defeat, but the deliberate fires of preparation. Forges hammering out new blades, cauldrons boiling pitch for the defenders. Whispers from captured outriders told of Shahanshah's growing desperation. He paced his chambers like a caged lion, cursing the name of Orhan Sahib and offering ever greater bribes to those whose loyalty wavered. "He promises lands to any who turn against us," one prisoner spat, bound and kneeling before Orhan Sahib's horse. Even now, riders slip through the gates under cover of night, seeking alliances with distant tribes. Orhan Sahib's response was measured, laced with the cold edge of inevitability. "Let him promise the moon and stars. Loyalty bought with lies crumbles like dry clay under rain. We bring truth wrapped in steel." The first day of the march blurred into strategic maneuvering. Orhan Sahib ordered the army to split into disciplined columns, Daimir Khan leading a swift detachment of archers and light cavalry to harass the city's outer patrols, cutting down supply caravans and sowing fear among the villagers who still clung to Shahanshah's rule. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman took the main body forward, establishing forward camps that encircled the western approaches, their spearmen digging trenches and erecting makeshift barricades from felled trees dragged from the forest's fringe. Tamir Boga and Mustafa ranged farther north, targeting the river outposts with silent raids under the cover of twilight. One such assault unfolded in the deepening gloom. Mustafa's men slipped through the reeds like ghosts, their blades flashing in the moonlight as they overwhelmed a small garrison guarding the water gates. "No mercy for those who serve the betrayer," Mustafa growled as steel met flesh, the river running red for a brief, terrible moment before the outpost fell silent. Altadin Saheb held the rear, ensuring no surprise attacks from behind, while Zarkin, Kuluds, Kilul, Al-Aliaddin Saheb and Jarkata Saheb rotated through the lines, their presence a steady anchor for the weary troops. Night fell again, heavier this time, the stars veiled by gathering clouds that rumbled with distant thunder. The army camped in a wide arc around the city's visible silhouette, fires kept low to avoid revealing their full strength. Orhan Saheb convened his captains in a shadowed tent, the fabric whispering in the wind like conspiratorial voices. Lantern light flickered across their faces, highlighting the grime and determination etched there. "Tomorrow we tighten the noose," he declared. Psychological blows before the physical siege. Then heralds to the walls under truce proclaim Yakid's fate, expose Shahanshah's lies. Let the common folk inside hear how their ruler trades their lives for his throne. Fear will do what arrows cannot. Turan volunteered to lead the heralds himself, his reputation as Orhan Saheb's unbreakable shield lending weight to the words. Falladio, still carrying the fire of his duel, suggested bolder moves. "Allow me a small force to probe the eastern gates. If the hordes approach, we slow them with ambushes in the passes." Dawn of the second day broke with tension thick as fog. The heralds advanced under white banners, their voices carrying across the open ground to the battlements where Shahanshah's defenders peered down with wary eyes. Tarhan stood tall, his words ringing clear and unyielding. "People of the city, hear the truth spoken in the name of justice. Yakid, the traitor who whispered in your ruler's ear, lies dead in the forest ashes, slain by the hand of honor. Shahanshah's alliances are chains of gold that will drag you all into the abyss. Surrender the gates, open your hearts to the true path, and mercy shall be granted. Resist, and the fires of consequence will consume these walls as they consume the forest." From the parapets came jeers and arrows, but not all defenders joined the mockery. Some faces turned inward, doubt flickering in their eyes as the seeds of division took root. Shahanshah himself appeared briefly upon the highest tower, his silhouette cloaked in finery, voice shrill with forced bravado. "Lies from the mouth of rebels, my walls will stand eternal. The eastern allies come even now, your bones will pave their path." Yet his tone carried the tremor of a man whose grip on power was slipping like sand through clenched fists. As the heralds withdrew unharmed, a calculated mercy to plant further unease, the true siege preparations accelerated. Orhan Saheb's engineers, drawn from the ranks of Abdul Rahman's men, began constructing siege engines from scavenged timber and captured wagons. Tall ladders wrapped in hides, battering rams reinforced with iron taken from fallen enemies, and platforms for archers to rain death upon the defenders. The encirclement tightened methodically, supply cuts were enforced with ruthless precision. Caravans attempting to reach the city were intercepted by Faladios's probing forces, their goods seized or burned in view of the walls, the smoke rising as a visible taunt. One such interception turned chaotic when a heavily guarded wagon train clashed with Kuluds and Kilul in a narrow defile. Steel sang once more, horses screamed, and the ground drank fresh blood, but the victory was swift, the captured grain distributed among Orhan Saheb's troops while the city's stores dwindled. Yet Shahanshah was not without cunning. Under the cover of night, his agents slipped out through hidden sally ports, attempting to burn Orhan Saheb's forward camps and assassinate key captains. One such raid targeted the tent of Mahmud and Abdul Rahman, shadows with poisoned daggers gliding through the darkness. Alarm cries split the night as Tarhan intercepted the intruders, his sword a blur that fell two before they could strike. "Traitors in the dark," he roared, rousing the camp to arms. The skirmish was brief but brutal, close quarters fighting amid tents that caught flame, smoke once again becoming the ally of chaos. Jarkata Saheb's axe cleaved through an assassin's guard, while Al-Aliaddin Saheb shielded a wounded sentry with his own body. The attackers were driven back, but the incident served as a grim reminder. Betrayal could strike from within as easily as from without. By the third dawn, the city was fully besieged, its walls a looming presence under a sky that now wept steady rain, turning the ground to mud that sucked at boots and hooves alike. Orhan Saheb stood upon a newly erected command hill, surveying the scene with the eye of a strategist who understood that sieges were won not only by steel but by the slow erosion of will. The river outpost had fallen completely, its waters now diverted or guarded, leaving the city's wells strained. Inside, tensions brewed, rumors spread of food shortages, of Shahanshah hoarding grain for his inner circle while the common people murmured discontent. Psychological warfare deepened. Captured banners of the fallen Eastern scouts were displayed on stakes before the gates, a silent warning of the allies who might never arrive in time. Then came the first major assault. Orhan Saheb gave the order as the rain eased, the clouds parting to reveal a pale sun. Ladders rose against the western wall under a hail of arrows and boiling oil from above. Tamir, Boga, and Mustafa led the climb, their shields raised against the deadly rain, bodies pressing upward in a human tide. For honor, for the faith, they shouted, voices drowned by the crash of stones and the screams of the wounded. Defenders poured pitch and fired arrows with desperate accuracy, but Orhan Sahib's archers under Damir Khan provided covering volleys that thinned the battlements. Faladios charged a secondary gate with a battering ram, the rhythmic thud echoing like the heartbeat of war itself. Zarkin and Kulids fought in the press, their blades claiming defenders who leaned too far over the parapets. In the midst of this fury, a personal challenge emerged from the walls. A champion of Shahansha, a hulking warrior named in whispers as one of the ruler's favored enforcers, descended through a sally port demanding single combat break the momentum. "Face me, dogs of rebellion," he bellowed, his axe gleaming with menace. Faladios stepped forward once more, the fire of his previous duel still alive in his veins. The duel unfolded in the mud before the gates, a brutal ballet of strength and skill. The champion swung with raw power, his blows shaking the ground, but Faladios danced aside, countering with precise strikes that drew blood from gaps in the armor. "Your master's lies end here," Faladios hissed between clashes. Steel met steel in a shower of sparks, mud splattering as they grappled. In the end, Faladios feinted a high blow and drove his sword low, ending the champion's life with a thrust that silenced the taunts from the walls. The defenders faltered visibly, their morale cracking like the stone under relentless pressure. Yet as the assault pressed on, horns sounded from the eastern horizon, distant, ominous, carried on the wind. The first riders of the eastern hordes had been sighted, their numbers fewer than feared but still a grave threat, banners of strange design flapping like the wings of carrion birds. Shahansha's desperate call had been answered in part, and now a new column approached, threatening to relieve the siege or crush Orhan Sahib's forces from behind. Orhan Sahib turned his gaze eastward, the rain tracing paths down his face like tears of the heavens. "Tarhin, Faladios, redeploy the rear guard. Altadin Sahib, take command of the eastern flank. We hold the walls and meet this new shadow with the same fire that consumed the forest." The army shifted with practiced discipline, leaving a holding force at the city while the bulk turned to face the incoming threat. As night began to fall once more, the dual pressures mounted, the besieged city groaning under encirclement, the approaching hordes kicking up dust clouds visible even in the fading light. Orhan Sahib rode between the lines, invoking the name of the Almighty in quiet prayers, his captains rallying the men with words of steel and faith. "The war sharpens," he murmured to Tarhin as they surveyed the gathering storm. "Shahansha thinks to drown us in numbers, but fate favors the just. Prepare for the clash that will decide whether these walls fall or we face betrayal anew from the east." And so the siege hung in precarious balance, the fires of the previous nights now mirrored in the distant campfires of the new enemy, the air thick with the promise of greater chaos, greater duels, and greater tests of loyalty. The march toward destiny continued, unyielding as the first stars emerged to witness a war that refused to end, its next chapter written in blood and the unbreaking will of men who fought not merely for victory, but for the soul of their world. The walls stood defiant, the hordes drew nearer, and somewhere within the city, Shahansha plotted his next desperate twist, unaware that the true storm was the one Orhan Sahib carried in his heart. A storm that would not be quelled until justice, honor, and fate had spoken their final, thunderous verdict. The rain had eased into a persistent drizzle by the time the horns of the eastern hordes grew louder, their deep, guttural calls rolling across the plains like the growl of some ancient, hungry beast awakened from slumber. Orhan Sahib stood upon the command hill, his cloak sodden and heavy, the fabric clinging to his armored frame like a second skin forged from the earth itself. The night was descending once more, wrapping the besieged city and the surrounding camps in a shroud of darkness broken only by the flickering torches along the battlements and the distant pinpricks of enemy campfires blooming on the eastern horizon. The air carried the mingled scents of wet mud, wood smoke, and the faint, acrid promise of impending bloodshed. Round him, the captains moved with purposeful urgency, Tarhin barking orders in his gravelly tone, Faladios sharpening his blade with rhythmic scrapes that echoed the tension, while Damir Khan directed his archers to reposition along the newly dug earthworks. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman reinforced the western siege lines, their spearmen driving stakes into the softening ground. Tamir, Boga, and Mustafa ranged ahead with scouting parties, vanishing into the gloom like predators on the hunt. Altadin Sahib, Zarkin, Kulids, Kilil, Al-Aliaddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib formed mobile reserves, their horses stamping impatiently as the weight of two fronts pressed upon the army like an invisible vice. "Allah the Just, the Avenger," Orhan Sahib whispered into the damp night, his hand resting upon the pommel of his sword as if drawing strength from its unyielding steel. "You have brought us through forest fire and forest betrayal. Now two shadows converge upon us, one behind stone walls, the other riding on borrowed winds. Grant us clarity in the chaos, honor in the steel, and let the traitorous heart of Shahansha be laid bare for all to witness." Tarhin stepped closer, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. The hordes number perhaps 3,000 Arhin Sahib riders from the wild steppes, light cavalry with curved bows and lances wrapped in strange hides. They move fast but lack the discipline of true believers. Their leader flies a banner marked with wolf skulls, a sign of their pagan hunger for plunder. Faladios joined them, his voice edged with the fire of past rivalries now turned outward. Shahanshah buys them with chests of gold taken from his own people's granaries. If we allow them to link with the city, the siege breaks and we face encirclement ourselves. We must strike the eastern threat before it fully forms, ambush in the narrow passes where their numbers mean nothing. Arhin Sahib nodded, his mind weaving strategy like a master weaver threading fate's loom. Then we divide with purpose, not panic. Tarhin, you take 500 of our finest archers under Damir Khan and heavy riders led by Mustafa. Circle wide through the southern ridges and strike their flank when they least expect the bite of steel. Faladios, you command the probe on the eastern gate of the city. Keep Shahanshah's defenders pinned and fearful, let no relief sally forth. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman hold the main siege lines, dig deeper trenches, prepare the rams for dawn. Altadin Sahib guard the central camp with Zarkin and Kuleds. Kilal and Al-Aliadin Sahib will range with Jarkata Sahib to watch for any hidden betrayals from within our own ranks. We cut supply, we sow fear, we let the night do half the work before steel finishes it. The army split under the cover of deepening darkness, movements executed with the silent precision of men who had learned the forest's lessons well. Arhin Sahib rode with the eastern detachment himself, the ground sucking at the horses' hooves as they navigated the rain-soaked plains toward the approaching threat. Hours slipped by in that slow, tense march. The only sounds the muffled clink of harness, the occasional whisper of prayer, and the distant rumble of thunder that mirrored the growing storm of war. Scouts returned periodically, their reports painting a picture of the hordes. Undisciplined but fierce, their camp loosely formed around wagons laden with looted goods, fires burning bright and careless as if they feared no shadow. Shahanshah's agents rode among them, no doubt whispering promises of easy riches once the city gates opened in relief. As the night reached its blackest heart, Tarhin's flanking force struck first. They emerged from the southern ridges like ghosts born of the rain, arrows loosed in disciplined volleys that whistled through the darkness and found marks among the sleeping riders. Chaos erupted in the enemy camp, horses reared, men shouted in alien tongues, and the wolf skull banner toppled as Damir Khan's archers picked off torchbearers one by one. Mustafa charged into the fray at the head of the heavy riders, his lance shattering shields and sending bodies tumbling into the mud. For Arhin Sahib, for the honor betrayed, he roared, voice cutting through the downpour. Steel clashed in close quarters, the rain turning blood into rivulets that flowed across the ground like dark serpents. Tarhin moved among them like an extension of the night itself, his sword intercepting blows meant for his brothers, his body once again a living shield as an arrow grazed his shoulder, drawing a line of fire across his flesh. He pressed on without pause, felling a horde chieftain whose death cry scattered his followers like leaves in a gale. Simultaneously, at the city walls, Faladios led his probing assault with calculated fury. Ladders rose again under cover of the same rain, but this time feigned, meant not to breach but to draw defenders to the eastern gate while hidden sappers under Tamir Boga worked at the foundations with picks and fire. Defenders poured boiling oil and arrows from above, their shouts mingling with the hiss of rain on hot pitch. Hold the line. Faladios commanded, his blade flashing as he cut down a sally party that dared emerge. Let Shahanshah taste the fear he sows. One defender, a captain loyal to the false ruler, leaned over the parapet to taunt. Your end comes with the dawn, rebel scum. Faladios answered with an arrow of his own, loosed from a captured bow, that silenced the boast forever. Smoke began to rise from the base of the wall where fires were kindled in the sapping trenches, slow, smoldering blazes fed by pitch and dry brush dragged from the forest's edge, their heat cracking stone even as the rain fought to quench them. Back on the eastern plains, the ambush devolved into a running battle as the hordes rallied under their wolf skull leader, a massive figure clad in furs and scaled armor, his voice a bellow that rallied his scattered riders. Plunder and blood for the gold of Shahanshah, he thundered, charging directly toward Arhin Sahib's position with a knot of his fiercest warriors. Arhin Sahib met the charge head-on, his stallion surging forward through the mud. The two forces collided in a thunderous crash of steel and horseflesh. Arhin Sahib's blade sang its deadly song, cleaving through a rider's guard and sending him crashing to the ground. Around him, Kilal and Al-Aliadin Sahib fought with disciplined grace, their spears thrusting in unison to unhorse attackers. Jarkata Sahib's axe rose and fell like a woodsman in a storm, hewing limbs and shattering lances. The psychological toll mounted as Arhin Sahib's men called out the truth amid the fray. Your gold is stained with the blood of innocents. Shahanshah betrays even you, his new allies will be the next to feel his knife when victory is won. The horde leader singled out Arhin Sahib, recognizing the commander by the crescent emblem upon his shield. Their duel unfolded in the heart of the melee, lances splintering on impact before blades took over. The enemy swung with brute strength, his curved sword whistling through the rain, but Orhan Sahib parried with the calm precision of faith-guided wrath. "You ride for a liar's promise," Orhan Sahib declared between clashes, voice steady despite the chaos. "Fate will not honor such oaths." Sparks flew as steel met steel, mud spraying with every pivot of their mounts. The horde leader landed a glancing blow that dented Orhan Sahib's pauldron, drawing a grunt of pain, but Orhan countered with a thrust that found the gap beneath the fur cloak, driving deep into the man's side. The chieftain toppled from his horse with a gurgling cry, his fall breaking the spirit of many who witnessed it. The hordes began to waver, their charge faltering as Tarhan's flanking force closed the trap, arrows and lances completing the encirclement. By the time the false dawn grayed the eastern sky, the eastern threat lay broken, hundreds of riders slain or scattered, their wagons captured or burned, the wolf skull banner trampled into the mud. Yet victory came at a cost. Wounds marked nearly every man, and several brave souls, including a young rider under Mustafa's command, had fallen to the steppe blades. Orhan Sahib rode among the survivors, offering words of solace and steel. "Their blood waters the plains of justice. We honor them by pressing on." Messengers raced back to the city lines with news of the triumph, the tidings rippling through the siege camp like a wave of renewed fire. Shahanshah, watching from his tower as the smoke from the eastern clash drifted on the wind, must have felt the news tighten further. His desperate gamble had bought only a brief delay, and now the walls themselves groaned under the pressure of sapping fires and relentless encirclement. As the rain finally ceased and a pale sun broke through the clouds, Orhan Sahib ordered the full assault to resume. The battering rams thudded against the main gates in rhythmic fury, each impact shaking the ancient stones. Ladders swarmed with climbers led by Mahmud and Abdul Rahman, while Damir Khan's archers kept the battlements under constant hail. Faladios, bloodied but unbowed, pressed the eastern sally, his men now exploiting the cracks widened by the night's fires. Inside the city, panic spread like wildfire. Shouts of "the hordes are broken," and "the walls fail," echoed from street to street. Common folk, long oppressed by Shahanshah's taxes and lies, began to murmur openly against their ruler, some even daring to throw stones from hidden alleys at the loyalist guards. Yet Shahanshah was not finished. In a final act of desperation, he unleashed his remaining elite from a hidden postern gate, a last sally meant to strike at Orhan Sahib's command position and sow chaos in the rear. The attackers surged out under cover of smoke from their own burning barricades, led by a veiled figure whose armor bore the marks of personal favor. As the two forces clashed anew in the muddy approaches, a cry went up. The leader of this sally was none other than a high captain who had once ridden with Orhan Sahib in younger days, now twisted by Shahanshah's gold. The personal betrayal stung like fresh salt in old wounds. Tarhan intercepted the charge, his sword blazing a path toward the traitor captain. "You chose the wrong shadow," Tarhan shouted as their blades met in a furious duel amid the press. Steel rang, sparks flying, until Tarhan's superior loyalty and skill drove his blade home, ending the traitor's life with a single, mercifully swift thrust. The sally collapsed, driven back into the city with heavy losses, the postern gate sealed once more but now under direct threat. Orhan Sahib surveyed the scene as the sun climbed higher, the walls cracked and blackened, the defenders visibly thinning. "The city weakens," he said to Faladios and Tarhan, who had returned bloodied but victorious. "One more push at dusk and the gates may yield, but watch for the final twist. Shahanshah's heart is black with cunning. He may yet seek to burn the city rather than surrender it." As the army prepared for the evening assault, a lone rider approached under a tattered flag of parley, not from the city, but from a small band that had broken away from the scattered eastern remnants. The rider knelt before Orhan Sahib, offering a captured chest of Shahanshah's gold as token. "Some among the horde see the lie now," he said in broken accents. "Your justice echoes even to the steppes. We offer our blades if mercy follows." Orhan Sahib regarded him long, then nodded once. "Mercy for those who turn from darkness, join the righteous, and your past is ash." Yet even as new allies swelled their ranks in small measure, distant dust clouds rose once more on the farthest eastern horizon, perhaps the main body of the hordes, delayed but now stirring, or perhaps another layer of Shahanshah's web of deceit. The captains exchanged glances heavy with unspoken understanding. The siege pressed on, the walls trembled, but the war refused to yield its final secret. Orhan Sahib turned his gaze to the city, then to the horizon, the weight of command settling deeper upon his shoulders like the cloak of night itself. "We hold," he declared, voice carrying to every ear within reach. "We endure, and when the sun sets this day we strike with the full wrath of betrayed honor. The walls will hear our prayer, the traitors will face their reckoning, and fate, by the will of the Almighty, will write the next line in blood and glory." The army stirred with renewed purpose, the rhythmic preparation of steel and prayer filling the air as the dual shadows of city and horizon loomed larger, promising that the true climax of this epic struggle still burned just beyond the reach of the fading light, waiting to erupt in fire, smoke, and the unyielding march toward justice that no wall or horde could forever deny. The war was far from over. It had merely entered its most perilous and defining hour. The sun dipped low on the horizon like a bloodied coin sinking into the sea of grass, casting long, jagged shadows across the cracked and blackened walls of Shahanshah's besieged city. The air hung thick with the residue of rain and smoke, a heavy cloak that clung to every man's lungs and turned the mud beneath their boots into a treacherous mire. Orhan Sahib remained upon the command hill, his silhouette carved against the dying light, eyes fixed upon the trembling fortress that had become the very heart of betrayal. The walls, once proud and unyielding, now bore the scars of fire and relentless pressure, great fissures snaking upward from the sapped foundations, stones loosened and blackened where Faladios's night fires had done their patient work. From within came the muffled sounds of desperation, the clatter of hasty repairs, the shouts of officers trying to quell rising panic, and the faint, desperate cries of women and children who sensed the noose tightening around their ruler's lies. Round Orhan Sahib, his captains gathered in a tight circle, their armor dented and streaked with dried blood and mud, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a single shielded lantern. Orhan stood closest, a fresh bandage wrapped around his shoulder where the arrow had grazed him during the night's eastern clash. Yet his posture remained unbowed, his hand never far from his sword. Faladios paced slowly, the fire of his duel still smoldering in his gaze, his blade clean but eager for more. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman leaned on their spears, breathing steadily after hours of holding the western lines. Damir Khan's fingers flexed around his bowstring, eyes scanning the battlements for any sign of movement. Tamir Boga and Mustafa stood ready with their raiding parties, while Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kulud's, Kilul, Al-Aliaddin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib formed the outer ring, their presence a silent vow of protection. The small band of former Horde riders who had turned to their cause waited at a respectful distance, their wolf skull talismans now discarded in the mud as a gesture of newfound loyalty. By the name of the most merciful, who turns night into day and weakness into strength, Orhan Sahib began, his voice low and resonant, carrying the weight of prayer and command. We have broken the eastern shadow and cracked the stone that shelters the serpent. Shahanshah feels the breath of justice upon his neck. His people starve while he hoards grain. His defenders waver as the truth of Yaqid's fate spreads like wildfire through their streets, yet he will not yield easily. Desperation breeds the darkest acts. At dusk we strike with everything we possess. Orhan, you will lead the main breach at the western gate with the rams and ladders. Faladios, take the eastern sally port, exploit the weakened stone and drive inward. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman, hold the center and prevent any countersally. Damir Khan, your archers will darken the sky above the walls. Tamir Boga and Mustafa, slip through the chaos and secure the river gate from within if the opportunity arises. Altuddin Sahib, you command the reserves with Zarkin and Kulud's. Watch for any final betrayal from the turned riders or hidden agents within our lines. Kilul, Al-Aliaddin Sahib and Jarkata Sahib will range the flanks and cut down any who attempt to flee the city under cover of smoke. The orders passed like sacred verses through the ranks. As the last light of day bled away and the sky deepened into a canvas of indigo and crimson, the army stirred with the slow, deliberate rhythm of men preparing for judgment. Torches were lit sparingly, their flames shielded to avoid revealing full strength. Prayers rose in murmured waves, verses invoking protection, victory, and the swift hand of fate upon the unjust. Orhan Sahib mounted his stallion once more, the beast sensing the tension and pawing at the mud. He rode slowly along the lines, speaking to clusters of warriors with quiet intensity. Remember the forest, he told a group of spearmen. Remember how fire turned against its master. Tonight the same shall happen within these walls. Fight not for plunder, but for the restoration of honor. Allah sees every oath kept and every oath broken. Dusk fell completely, and the assault began with the deep, rhythmic thud of the battering rams slamming against the main western gate. Each impact reverberated through the ground like the heartbeat of an angry giant. Orhan led the charge personally, shield raised high as arrows and stones rained down from above. His voice rose above the din, push for Orhan Sahib, for justice long denied. The heavy timbers of the ram, reinforced with iron scavenged from fallen enemies, groaned and cracked under the repeated blows. Ladders rose in waves, men scrambling upward under the covering fire of Damir Khan's archers, whose arrows arced overhead in deadly volleys that forced defenders to duck behind Merlin's. Bodies fell from the walls, some defenders, some attackers, plummeting into the mud with sickening thuds that only fueled the fury on both sides. At the eastern end, Faladios unleashed his assault with the precision of a man who had already tasted personal vengeance. The sapped stones gave way more easily now, crumbling under the combined pressure of fire and iron picks. His men poured through the widening breach like a tide of steel, clashing immediately with Shahanshah's elite guards in the narrow streets beyond. Close quarters fighting erupted in the tight confines, swords ringing against shields, spears thrusting between gaps in armor, the air filled with the grunts and cries of men locked in mortal struggle. Faladios carved a path forward, his blade a whirlwind of retribution. "Where is your false king?" he shouted into the chaos. "Let him face the consequence of his whispers." A defender captain lunged at him from a side alley, but Faladios sidestepped and drove his sword home with a single decisive motion, the man's death cry echoing off the stone walls. Inside the city, panic truly took hold. Streets that had once echoed with the boasts of Shahanshah's court now filled with the sounds of flight and confusion. Common folk, long ground under the heel of heavy taxes and false promises, began to emerge from their homes, some even daring to aid the attackers by pointing out hidden guard positions or blocking the paths of loyalist reinforcements. Smoke began to rise from several quarters, not from Orhan Sahib's forces, but from fires deliberately set by desperate defenders attempting to create barriers of flame and confusion. The acrid haze thickened, turning the night into a labyrinth of shadow and orange glow, much like the forest blaze that had claimed Yakid's life. In the heart of this growing inferno, a critical moment unfolded near the central square. Tamir Boga and Mustafa, having slipped through a secondary breach with a small band of elite fighters, reached the river gate from the inside. They fought a fierce skirmish against the guards stationed there, steel flashing in the firelight as they overwhelmed the outnumbered defenders. "The gate is ours," Mustafa roared, his voice carrying across the chaos as they secured the heavy bars and signaled with a flaming arrow to the forces outside. The river gate swung open, allowing a fresh wave of Orhan Sahib's troops to pour in, flanking the main defensive lines and sowing even greater disorder. Yet Shahanshah was not one to surrender without a final, venomous twist. From the highest tower of his palace, visible even through the smoke, he unleashed his last reserve, a contingent of his most fanatical personal guard, led by a figure cloaked in black whose face remained hidden behind a veiled helm. This force struck suddenly from a concealed passage near the palace gates, aiming directly at the heart of the invading columns in an attempt to assassinate Orhan Sahib or create enough chaos to allow their ruler a secret escape. The clash that followed was among the fiercest of the night. Altadin Sahib met the Black Cloak leader in single combat amid the swirling smoke, their blades singing a deadly duet. "Your master's time is finished," Altadin Sahib declared as sparks flew from their meeting steel. The veiled warrior fought with desperate skill, but Altadin's loyalty and experience prevailed. With a powerful overhead strike, he shattered the enemy's guard and ended the threat with a blow that sent the veiled helm rolling into the mud, revealing the face of yet another former ally who had sold his soul for Shahanshah's gold. As the palace guard collapsed, the main western gate finally buckled under Tarhin's relentless pressure. With a great groan of splintering timber and cracking stone, the massive doors gave way, allowing Orhan Sahib's main force to surge into the city like a flood of righteous wrath. Street by street, square by square, the fighting continued, chaotic, close, and merciless. Jarkata Sahib's axe cleared entire alleys, while Kilal and Al-Aliaddin Sahib fought back-to-back against pockets of resistance. Zarkin and Kilad secured key intersections, preventing organized counterattacks. The turned horde riders proved their new loyalty by charging into the fray with wild cries, their step tactics surprisingly effective in the open squares. Orhan Sahib himself entered the city at the head of his personal guard, his stallion's hooves striking sparks from the cobblestones as he rode through the breached gate. His presence ignited fresh courage in his men and despair in the defenders. "Lay down your arms and live," he called out, his voice carrying over the din. "The betrayer Shahanshah alone must answer for his crimes. The people of this city are not our enemies, only the poison that has ruled them." Many defenders, seeing the inevitable, began to throw down their weapons, kneeling in the streets as Orhan Sahib's forces passed. But the palace itself remained defiant. Shahanshah had retreated behind its inner walls, ordering his remaining loyalists to set fires in the outer courtyards to slow the advance. Smoke billowed thicker than ever, flames licking at ancient tapestries and wooden beams, turning the night into a blazing inferno that threatened to consume the entire city if not contained. Orhan Sahib ordered disciplined teams to fight the fires even as the assault continued, refusing to let justice devolve into mindless destruction. As the battle for the palace gates intensified, with Tarhin and Faladios leading the final push side by side, a lone messenger staggered out from a side postern under a flag of desperate truce. He fell to his knees before Orhan Sahib, gasping, "The Shahanshah," he begs parley. He offers terms his throne for his life and reveals that more eastern hordes are but one day's ride away, summoned by his final riders before the siege closed. He claims they will burn everything if he falls. Orhan Sahib's expression remained carved from stone, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames. He looked toward the palace, then to the eastern horizon where faint dust clouds could still be glimpsed against the stars. Tarhin and Faladios stood ready at his side, breathing hard, their blades still dripping. The city burned in controlled patches, its streets now largely in Orhan Sahib's hands, yet the palace held, and a new shadow loomed once more on the horizon. "The serpent still coils within his final den," Orhan Sahib said quietly, yet his voice carried to every captain nearby. "He offers lies wrapped in desperation, hoping to buy time for his last allies to arrive. But we will not bargain with betrayal. Prepare the final assault on the palace at first light. We take the head of this corruption before the new hordes can tip the scales. Allah has brought us this far through forest, fire, and steel. He will not abandon us now." The army consolidated its gains throughout the smoldering night, securing granaries to feed the hungry citizens, posting guards at every gate, and tending to the wounded with whatever mercy the chaos allowed. Prayers rose continuously, mingling with the crackle of dying flames. Yet as the first hints of gray touched the eastern sky, the distant thunder of approaching hooves began to echo once again, faint but unmistakable. The war had entered its most dangerous phase. The city was nearly won, but the final confrontation with Shahanshah loomed inside his burning palace, while a fresh storm gathered on the horizon, threatening to undo everything in one last, cataclysmic clash. Orhan Sahib stood before the palace gates as the night waned, his captains arrayed around him, the weight of destiny heavy upon them all. The fire still danced, the smoke still rose, and the fate of kingdoms hung upon the edge of a blade yet to fall. The march of justice continued unrelenting into the uncertain dawn, where betrayal might strike its final blow or honor would at last claim its hard-won throne. The end was near, yet the true reckoning had only just begun to unfold. The sun hung low and swollen in the blood-red western sky, casting its dying light across the smoke-veiled plains like the eye of a wrathful judge. Orhan Sahib stood upon the eastern battlements, his frame etched in silhouette against the fatting glow, cloak whipping in the hot wind that carried the mingled stench of charred flesh, spilled blood, and the distant sweat of 10,000 waiting riders. The horde had pulled back after the brutal midday repulse, their dead and dying littering the approaches like broken offerings to false gods, yet their campfires burned brighter than ever, a vast sea of orange stars pooling with renewed malice. Drums rolled low and steady now, not the frenzied beat of charge, but the patient rhythm of encirclement, a slow tightening of the noose that whispered of starvation, betrayal, and the slow erosion of will. Round Orhan Sahib, the captains gathered in grim council upon the wall walk, their faces hollowed by exhaustion and streaked with grime. Tarhan leaned heavily on his shield, fresh blood seeping through the bindings on his shoulder, yet his eyes remained sharp as tempered steel. Faladios stood with arms crossed, breathing still ragged from the duel that had felled the warlord, his blade never sheathed. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman wiped sweat from their brows, their spears planted like markers of defiance. Damir Khan tested the string of his bow with calloused fingers, while Tamir Boga and Mustafa scanned the river approaches with narrowed gazes. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkan, Kuleds, Kilil, Al-Aliuddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib formed the inner ring, their presence a silent vow that the heart of the city would not falter. Even the turned horde riders waited nearby, their loyalty now hardened by the day's shared blood, though doubt still flickered in some eyes like distant lightning. "The day has cost them dearly," Orhan Sahib said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying the rhythmic cadence of prayer and command through the gathering dusk. "Hundreds lie broken before our walls, their chieftains' pride shattered by fire and steel, yet numbers remain their cruel ally. They prepare to encircle us fully by nightfall, cutting every road and every hope of relief, and from the north the wavering garrisons stir. Some have already ridden to join the wolves, drawn by promises of plunder and the lie that our cause is dust. Allah tests us now as he tested the faithful in the wilderness, through fire that refines or consumes." Tarhan spoke first, voice gravelly with fatigue yet unyielding. "Raman's 500 bolster us, but the traitors among the frontier captains number perhaps another 1,000 if they fully turn. If they strike our northern gate while the horde presses the east, we will be ground between hammer and anvil." Faladios nodded, his rivalry-forged resolve burning brighter in the face of greater odds. "Then we strike the anvil first. Let me take a swift force through the river gate under cover of full dark. Hit their eastern wing where the ground is soft from the day's blood. Sauchaos, draw their eyes away from the north. If the garrisons hesitate, we buy time for truth to reach them, proof of Shahanshah's fall, of Yaqid's judgment, of justice that does not bend." Orhan Sahib's gaze swept the horizon where the northern dust clouds grew thicker, faint banners visible now against the twilight, some bearing the old marks of frontier loyalty, others newly stained with the horde's crimson. "We divide with purpose once more. Tarhan, you will command the northern defenses with Raman's spears and Altuddin Sahib's reserves. Zarkan and Kuleds, watch every shadow for the knife of betrayal from within. Kilil and Al-Aliuddin Sahib, range the inner streets and keep the people steady. Feed them what grain remains, remind them that mercy flows from the just. Jarkata Sahib, your axe will guard the palace granaries. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman, hold the western wall and prepare for any sally. Damir Khan, conserve arrows but loose death upon any who crest the parapets. Tamir Boga and Mustafa, guard the river and strike any who attempt to ford under darkness. Faladios and I will lead the counter-raid on the eastern wing. We move as one shadow, strike as lightning, and return before the moon climbs high. Let fire and smoke once again turn their strength against them." As the last light bled from the sky and true night cloaked the world in its heavy velvet, the raiding party slipped out through the river gate, Orhan Sahib at its head, Faladios at his side, 200 of their finest moving like ghosts through the reeds and shallows. The water ran cold and silent around their legs, muffling every step. Prayers rose in hushed murmurs. "In the name of the compassionate, guide our blades and shield our backs." They circled wide under the cover of darkness, the distant drums of the horde masking their approach. Smoke from the day's blazes still lingered, providing perfect concealment as they closed upon the enemy's eastern flank. The raid erupted without warning. Arrows whistled from the reeds, Daimir Khan's detached skirmishers losing silent death into the unsuspecting camps. Then steel sang as Orhan Sahib and Faladios charged into the press. Close quarters chaos swallowed the night once more. Blades flashed in the firelight of overturned braziers, horses screamed and bolted as tents ignited in sudden blooms of flame. For justice, for the fallen of the forest. Orhan Sahib roared, his sword carving a path through startled riders, each strike a measured prayer of retribution. Faladios fought like a storm incarnate, his blade reaping lives with the same fury that had ended Yakid and the palace guards. A horde sub-commander lunged at him with a lance. Faladios shattered the shaft and drove his sword through the man's throat in one fluid motion. Smoke thickened rapidly as more tents caught fire, turning the eastern wing into a blazing labyrinth of confusion and panic. Riders collided with one another in the haze, commands lost in the roar of flames and the clash of steel. Psychological terror spread like the fire itself. Raiders shouted the names of the dead. Yakid burned still. Shahanshah rots upon his stolen throne. Your gold buys only graves. Many in the horde wavered, whispers of doubt turning to open fear as they saw their own brothers cut down by shadows they could scarcely see. Yet the enemy rallied with desperate fury. A fresh knot of elite riders surged toward Orhan Sahib, drawn by his banner. In the heart of the inferno, another intense personal duel ignited. Their war priest, a gaunt figure clad in ritual furs and marked with blood runes, singled out Faladios, howling curses in his tongue. Your false god deserts you tonight. The duel unfolded amid swirling smoke and leaping flames, blades ringing against each other in a deadly rhythm. The priest fought with frenzied zeal, his curved blade whistling in wild arcs, but Faladios met every blow with calculated wrath, his years of rivalry and loyalty forging movements that no rage could match. Your curses are wind, Faladios growled between clashes. Justice is iron. In a final cataclysmic exchange, Faladios parried high, spun low, and drove his sword upward beneath the priest's guard, ending the challenge with a thrust that silenced the curses forever. Orhan Sahib pressed the advantage, his small force cutting deep into the flank before the alarm fully spread. Wagons burned, horses scattered, and dozens fell before the raiders withdrew as swiftly as they had struck, melting back into the night toward the river gate. Behind them, the eastern camp blazed, forcing the horde to divert hundreds of riders to contain the fires and restore order, buying precious hours for the city's defense. As the raiding party returned through the river gate, breathing hard and bloodied but unbroken, the northern horizon erupted with new movement. The wavering garrisons had chosen. Some banners, perhaps 300 spears, rode openly toward the horde lines, joining the enemy in a clear act of betrayal. Yet others, led by the steadfast among them, broke away and galloped hard for the city's northern gate, answering Raman's call at the last moment. Tarhan met them there with drawn steel and watchful eyes, testing their oaths before allowing entry. Loyalty proven in blood or proven false, he warned them. Choose now, for there is no middle ground before Allah. Inside the palace square, Orhan Sahib gathered his captains once more as the night deepened further. The fires on the plains still raged, casting an orange glow that painted every face in hues of war. Wounds were tended, prayers offered, and the grim tally of the day counted in silence. The horde, though bloodied and disordered, remained vast, encirclement nearly complete, their next push likely to come at first light with renewed fury born of humiliation. The coin of the north has landed uneven, Orhan Sahib said, voice heavy yet resonant with unbreaking faith. Some have chosen darkness, swelling the shadow outside our walls. Others have returned to the light, strengthening our resolve, but the true test remains. By dawn they will press every gate, every breach. We have faced the forest's ambush, the palace's fire, the siege's grind, and now this storm of betrayal from every quarter. Let no man waver, let every blade speak the truth of honor. We turn this city into the forge where the hordes will shatter, or we meet our end with heads high and hearts pure. Faladios wiped his blade clean, eyes meeting Orhan Sahib's with the fire of shared trials. Tarhan tightened the bindings on his wounds, ready once more. The other captains nodded, their silence more eloquent than any oath. As the first faint gray of false dawn touched the eastern sky, the horde's drums swelled into a thunderous roar. Horns sounded across the plains. The final great assault stirred, riders mounting, lances lowering, the full weight of their numbers preparing to crash against the scarred walls in one cataclysmic wave. Smoke still rose from the burned camps, fire still smoldered on the battlefield, and the air thickened with the promise of steel, chaos, and the scales of fate hanging in precarious balance. Orhan Sahib mounted his stallion at the head of the central reserve, blade drawn, Tarhan and Faladios flanking him like twin guardians of destiny. The war reaches its crucible, he declared, voice carrying to every defender within earshot. Hold the walls, hold your faith. Let the Almighty witness that we fight not for a city of stone but for the soul of justice itself. If this dawn brings victory, it will echo through the ages. If it brings martyrdom, let our blood water the seeds of a greater dawn yet to come. The horde charged, the walls shook. Steel met steel in a roar that swallowed the world. And in that moment, as fire and smoke once again became the turning point amid the chaos of close combat and desperate defense, the epic struggle pressed unrelentingly forward, its outcome veiled in blood, honor, and the unyielding will of men who refused to let betrayal or overwhelming numbers write the final word. The night had passed, but the true storm had only broken fully upon them. The war continued, vast and unforgiving, marching toward whatever judgment the heavens would decree when the sun rose fully over the field of reckoning. The sun reached its merciless zenith, bathing the blood-soaked plains and the cracked walls of the city in a harsh, unforgiving light that revealed every scar, every fallen body, every banner torn and trampled. The horde's final, all-out assault crashed against the defenses like the wrath of a storm long withheld. 10,000 riders surged forward in a single unbroken tide, lances gleaming like fangs, arrows flying in dense clouds that whistled through the air and thudded into wood and flesh with sickening regularity. Drums thundered without pause, a relentless heartbeat that drove men and horses alike into a frenzy of rage and desperation. Smoke from the night's raid still rose in black pillars from their eastern camp, mingling with fresh blazes kindled along the approaches, turning the entire battlefield into a choking, hellish haze where vision blurred and steel found its mark through sound and instinct alone. Orhan Sahib rode at the head of the central reserve, his stallion's hooves striking sparks from the cobblestones as he moved swiftly toward the eastern breach where the pressure was greatest. His blade was already drawn, its edge nicked yet hungry, and his voice rose above the roar like a call to prayer amid battle. By the most merciful, who turns the tide of armies and weighs every soul in the balance of justice, hold fast. Let every strike today be a witness before the Almighty that honor does not break, that betrayal does not triumph. Tarhin rode ever at his right, a living shield scarred by countless intercepted blows, his shoulder wound weeping but his sword arm unyielding. Faladios charged on the left, his face a mask of fierce resolve forged through rivalries and reckonings, his blade still wet from the street duels of the morning. The eastern wall shuddered under the renewed onslaught. Ladders slammed home in greater numbers than before, and horde warriors swarmed upward with the fury of men who knew this push would decide everything. Faladios met the cresting tide with unbridled wrath, his sword carving deadly arcs that sent climbers tumbling back into the press below. "You come for a dead man's gold and a traitor's dream," he bellowed, steel clashing against steel in a deafening cacophony. Close quarters fighting exploded along the parapets, men locked in brutal embraces, daggers flashing in the smoke, bodies falling from the heights in sprays of crimson that painted the stones below. Daimir Khan's archers, quivers nearly spent, loosed their final disciplined volleys, each arrow finding a mark and thinning the wave just enough to buy precious moments. At the northern gate, the traitor garrisons pressed harder, their spears reinforced by fresh-step riders who had chosen the path of shadow. Tarhin rushed there with Raman and the inner reserves, organizing a desperate but disciplined stand. "Betrayal ends here," Tarhin roared as he intercepted a charging traitor, his sword shattering the man's guard and driving deep. The fighting in the gatehouse was savage and intimate, spears thrusting through narrow gaps, axes cleaving shields, the air thick with the grunts and cries of men who had once called each other brother. One of the wavering captains, now fully turned, faced Tarhin directly amid the chaos. Their duel was swift and merciless. "You sold your oath for dust," Tarhin growled between ringing blows. With a powerful thrust born of unbreaking loyalty, Tarhin ended the traitor's life, his death sending a visible fracture through the enemy ranks at the northern approach. Inside the city, the people had moved beyond fear into a grim resolve. Citizens, men, women, and even the young carried stones, water, and whatever weapons they could find to the walls, aiding the defenders in small but vital ways. Orhan Sahib's earlier words of mercy and justice had taken root. They fought not merely for survival, but for the promise of a city reborn under honor rather than tyranny. As the sun beat down without mercy, the greatest crisis unfolded at the main eastern breach. The repeated assaults had finally widened the gap, and a massive wave of horde warriors poured through like a dark flood, clashing with Faladios' thinning lines in the blood-slick streets. The fighting turned house to house, alley to alley, swords ringing off walls, spears thrusting through doorways, smoke from ignited rooftops creating a labyrinth of flame and shadow. Faladios stood as the unbreakable anchor, his blade reaping a harvest of retribution as he held the line with a small knot of elite fighters. "Push them back into the fire that birthed them," he shouted, his voice raw yet defiant. In the heart of that inferno, fate delivered its most personal trial. A horde overlord vast in stature, his armor heavy with trophies of conquered peoples, forced his way through the breach and locked eyes with Orhan Sahib himself. The overlord charged with a thunderous cry, his massive curved blade raised high. "Your justice is a lie for weak men," he bellowed. Orhan Sahib met the charge without flinching, Tarhin and Faladios closing into support, but allowing their commander the honor of the decisive stroke. Their duel unfolded in the open square before the breach, a whirlwind of steel and wool amid the swirling smoke. The overlord fought with brute power, each swing capable of shattering bone, but Orhan Sahib moved with the measured precision of faith and experience, parrying, feinting, countering with strikes that drew blood from gaps in the heavy armor. Your rage serves only darkness, Orhan Sahib declared between clashes, voice steady as forged iron. Fate has already judged Shahanshah and Yaqid. Now it judges you. The exchange reached its climax as the overlord overextended in fury. Orhan Sahib sidestepped the killing blow, then drove his blade upward in a thrust guided by prayer and unyielding resolve. The steel found its mark beneath the armor, sinking deep. The overlord staggered, eyes wide with shock, and collapsed to his knees before toppling forward into the dust. His fall sent a visible wave of panic through the invaders pouring through the breach, their momentum shattered as surely as their leader's body. Seizing the turning point, Orhan Sahib raised his bloodied blade high. Now, for honor and the Almighty, drive them back. The defenders surged forward with renewed fire. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman led a counter from the west, their spearmen slamming into the flanks. Tamir Boga and Mustafa struck from the river, their fire arrows igniting fresh chaos. Jarkata Sahib's axe cleared paths through the press, while Zarkin, Kulad's, Kilul, Al-Aliaddin Sahib and Altuddin Sahib held the inner lines with unbreakable discipline. The turned horde riders fought with particular redemption, their arrows and charges sowing confusion among their former kin. The horde wavered, their great assault, meant to break the city once and for all, began to fracture under the weight of heavy losses, burning camps, and the sight of their overlord slain before their eyes. They pulled back in disordered waves, leaving the approaches carpeted with their dead, the smoke rising thicker than ever as a testament to the cost. Yet victory remained incomplete. As the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the battlefield in hues of blood and gold, scouts brought urgent word from the northern plains. The last of the wavering garrisons had made their final choice, some joining the retreating horde in flight, others riding hard for the city under banners of belated loyalty. But among them rode a small, shadowed contingent, agents of deeper deceit, perhaps survivors of Shahanshah's inner circle, carrying one final venomous plot to assassinate Orhan Sahib amid the chaos of consolidation. Orhan Sahib stood amid the reclaimed breach, breathing heavily, surrounded by his captains, Tarhan wiping blood from his brow, Faladios leaning on his sword yet standing tall, the others bloodied but unbroken. The people of the city emerged cautiously, some cheering, others weeping in relief, as the granaries were opened once more and the wounded tended with whatever mercy the day allowed. The walls have held, Orhan Sahib declared, his voice carrying the rhythmic weight of hard-won triumph and lingering vigilance. The horde is broken for this day. Their overlord lies among the ashes of his ambition. Shahanshah's shadow fades further with every traitor answered in steel, yet the war does not end with one repulse. The northern riders approach, some in loyalty, some perhaps in deceit. We must secure the city, quench the fires, and prepare for whatever final shadow crawls from the ruins of this battle. Let every man remain watchful. Let every prayer rise unceasing. Justice has claimed another victory, but the serpent's coils may yet twitch in the dark. As night began to gather once more, the distant horns of the approaching northern force echoed faintly across the plains, uncertain banners fluttering against the blood-red sky. Tarhan and Faladios exchanged a knowing glance, hands never far from their hilts. The captains moved swiftly to consolidate defenses, tend the fallen, and watch every shadow for the last twist of betrayal. Orhan Sahib gazed eastward toward the retreating horde and then northward toward the uncertain riders, the weight of command etched deeper into his features. The fire still smoldered, the smoke still curled like questioning spirits, and the rhythmic beat of distant drums faded but did not vanish entirely. "The march of justice continues," he murmured, voice low yet resonant with the fire of faith. "Through forest and flame, siege and betrayal we have endured. Now as the night deepens again, we stand ready for whatever dawn or darkness the Almighty decrees next. The war is not ended. It is merely paused to draw a deeper breath before the final reckoning." And so the epic struggle pressed onward into the gathering twilight, honor tested to its limit, loyalty weighed in blood, and fate leaning close once more, ready to write the next chapter in smoke, steel, and the unbreaking will of those who refused to let the shadows claim the light. The city stood defiant, its people stirring with cautious hope, while beyond the walls the remnants of the horde regrouped and the northern riders drew nearer, carrying with them the promise of either reinforcement or one last, desperate knife in the dark. The story marched unrelentingly forward, its fire undimmed, its oath unbroken, toward whatever judgment awaited when the sun rose again over a battlefield still hungry for more. The new dawn broke pale and unforgiving over the scarred city, its light filtering through lingering veils of smoke like the hesitant judgment of heaven itself. Orhan Sahib stood upon the highest remaining tower of the palace, his silhouette framed against a sky streaked with the faint reds and golds of a sun that had already witnessed too much blood. The plains beyond the walls lay littered with the silent testimony of yesterday's fury. Broken lances protruding from the earth like accusing fingers, horses wandering riderless among the fallen, and the distant ridge where the remnants of the horde had withdrawn, their campfires now fewer, their movements cautious and watchful. The air still tasted of ash and iron, heavy upon the tongue, while the wind carried faint echoes of distant horns, reminders that the beast, though wounded, still breathed. Below in the streets, the city stirred with the slow, deliberate rhythm of recovery and vigilance. Citizens moved like shadows reborn, carrying water to the wounded, clearing debris from the breaches, and offering quiet prayers at makeshift shrines where the names of the fallen were whispered like sacred verses. The granaries, guarded fiercely by Jarkata Sahib and his axe, distributed meager rations with careful justice, ensuring no voice rose in hungered discontent. Wounded defenders lay upon pallets in the great halls, their groans mingling with the murmured recitations of holy words that sought to ease both body and soul. Tarhan approached the tower steps, his frame marked by fresh bindings and the unyielding posture of a man who had stood between death and his commander more times than blades could count. The northern riders are fully integrated, Arhan Sahib. Those who prove true swell our ranks by nearly 400 spears. The traitors among them have been dealt with. Their bodies hang upon the northern gate as warning. Yet whispers persist. Some claim hidden agents still move among the people, carrying the last venom of Shahanshah's court, seeking to turn hearts with promises of gold or threats of greater hordes yet to come. Palladios ascended behind him, his eyes sharp with the fire that had carried him through duels in forest, palace, and street alike. The horde upon the ridge numbers perhaps 6,000 now. They lick their wounds but do not flee. Scouts report new banners joining them under cover of night, tribes drawn by tales of our victory and the chance to claim what Shahanshah's gold once promised. They prepare not for open charge, but for encirclement and slow starvation. If we sit idle, the walls become our tomb. Arhan Sahib turned, his gaze steady upon his captains as they gathered once more in the grand chamber, the air thick with the scent of oil lamps and drying blood. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman leaned upon their spears, faces etched with the lines of men who had thrust death downward from the battlements hour after hour. Daimir Khan rested his near-empty quiver at his feet, fingers still calloused from endless drawing. Tamir Boga and Mustafa bore the damp marks of river raids, their eyes scanning maps with tactical precision. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kuleds, Kilal, Al-Aliaddin Sahib, and the ever-vigilant Jarkata Sahib completed the circle, their presence a living wall around the heart of the reclaimed realm. By the name of the ever-living, who raises the fallen and humbles the proud, Arhan Sahib began, his voice resonant and rhythmic, blending oath with the slow cadence of destiny unfolding. We have passed through the crucible of yesterday's storm. The overlord lies cold among his dead. The assassins' blades have been turned against their masters. The people witness that justice guards its own even in the darkest hour, yet the war sharpens its edge once more. The horde does not retreat fully, they coil like serpents awaiting weakness. The northern whispers speak of greater shadows gathering beyond the horizon. We cannot merely defend, we must strike while their spirit fractures and our own burns bright. He traced strategies upon the captured maps with deliberate strokes of his dagger. Tarhan, you will lead a strong force to the northern approaches, consolidate the loyal garrisons, cut any supply lines the horde attempts to re-establish, and watch for the final treachery from those who still waver. Take Zarkin and Kuleds with you, let their blades remind all of unbreaking oaths. Kilal and Al-Aliaddin Sahib secure the inner city and the river, ensure no poison reaches our wells or our hearts. Jarkata Sahib, your axe remains the guardian of the palace and the granaries, let no shadow slip past. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman reinforce the western wall and prepare mobile companies for counter-raids. Daimir Khan, gather what arrows remain and train the citizens who wish to stand. Every bow counts in the days ahead. Tamir Boga and Mustafa range wide along the river under cover of twilight, burn their outlying camps and scatter their scouts. Palladios and I will take the eastern probe, strike their ridge under the next night's veil, sow chaos in their heart, and let them taste the fire they sought to bring upon us. The council dispersed with purposeful silence, orders passing like sacred invocations through the ranks. As the day wore on beneath a sky that threatened rain, the city transformed once more, from a battered fortress into a blade being honed for the next blow. Men repaired breaches with scavenged stone and timber, sharpened dull edges upon whetstones that sang a low metallic hymn, and shared stories of the forest ambush, the palace fall, and yesterday's repulse to steel weary hearts. Arhan Sahib walked among them, his words blending seamlessly into the rhythm of preparation. We have faced the wolf in the wood and the serpent upon the throne. Now we face the storm upon the plain. Stand with faith, and the Almighty will turn their numbers into their undoing. As the sun dipped toward the western horizon, painting the plains in hues of deepening crimson, the first probes from the horde returned. Small bands of riders tested the outer defenses, losing arrows and attempting to draw out sallies. Daimir Khan's archers answered with precise, conserving volleys that felled several and sent the rest scattering back toward the ridge. One captured scout, bound and brought before Orhan Sahib in the square, spat defiance laced with desperation. "Your walls will crumble under our next wave. Greater tribes come drawn by the death of our overlord and the promise of your city's riches. Surrender now or watch everything burn as Shahanshah's dreams burned." Orhan Sahib regarded him without anger, voice calm as iron forged in prayer. "Tell your chieftains that we do not fear shadows born of lies. Yakid's betrayal ended in forest flame. Shahanshah's rule ended upon his own throne. Your rage serves only the wind. Lay down your arms and live under justice, or face the consequence we have shown all who choose darkness." The scout was released under truce, carrying the message like a seed of doubt sown deep into the enemy ranks. Psychological warfare deepened as night fell once more. The defenders raised captured horde banners upside down upon the walls, a silent taunt that whispered of broken pride and coming judgment. Inside, prayers rose continuously, a rhythmic undercurrent that defied the distant rumble of enemy drums. Under the cover of full darkness, Faladios and Orhan Sahib led their probe toward the ridge. 200 elite riders moved like ghosts through the plains, guided by the faint glow of enemy fires and the knowledge of the land bought with previous blood. They struck swiftly and without mercy, arrows whistling from hidden positions, torches flung into supply tents, blades flashing in the sudden blaze as chaos erupted in the horde's heart. Faladios carved through a knot of startled guards, his sword singing the same deadly song that had ended Yakid and the palace elites. Orhan Sahib fought at the forefront, his blade a beacon of justice amid the smoke and flame, each strike measured yet relentless. A fierce skirmish unfolded near the central enemy camp. A new chieftain rising in the vacuum left by the slain overlord charged Orhan Sahib with a band of his fiercest warriors. Their clash rang out in the firelit night, steel meeting steel in a whirlwind born of desperation and faith. The chieftain fought with raw-steppe fury, but Orhan Sahib's discipline and unyielding oath prevailed. In a final, decisive exchange, Orhan parried a heavy blow and drove his blade home, felling the rising leader and shattering the momentary rally around him. The raid withdrew as swiftly as it had struck, leaving fresh fires and panic in its wake. The horde's encampment descended into disarray, their encirclement plans delayed by the need to contain the blaze and mourn another fallen leader. As the raiding party returned through the eastern gate before the moon climbed high, scouts brought urgent tidings from the farthest horizons. Greater dust clouds rose beyond the ridge, not merely scattered tribes, but a larger alliance stirred by rumors of the city's fall and the power vacuum left in Shahanshah's wake. And among the northern approaches, one final shadow moved, a lone rider bearing a sealed message from distant powers, offering alliance or demanding submission, its true intent veiled in diplomatic silk. Orhan Sahib stood once more upon the tower as the night deepened further, the fires on the ridge still burning bright against the blackness. His captains gathered below, bloodied, weary, yet resolute, Tarhan ever the shield, Faladios the storm, the others pillars of the realm they had reclaimed through fire and steel. "The war does not relent," Orhan Sahib declared, his voice carrying the heavy, rhythmic weight of history itself speaking through him. "We have broken their charge, slain their leaders, and turned their fire against them time and again. Yet new shadows gather on the horizon, drawn by the scent of our blood and the promise of our city. Greater tests await, alliances forged in necessity or deceit, encirclement that starves the body while testing the soul. We have faced ambush in the ancient wood, flames in the palace halls, sieges that ground stone and will alike, and storms of steel from every quarter. By the mercy of the Almighty, we endure still." He looked out over the city, its people stirring with cautious hope, its walls scarred but standing, its defenders bloodied but unbowed, then toward the distant ridge and the uncertain horizons beyond. "Prepare every defense, send heralds of truth to any who will listen, but keep every blade sharp and every prayer rising. The serpent's head may be severed, but its body still writhes. The march of justice presses onward into deeper night and brighter dawn. Let the hordes come, let the shadows gather. We stand ready not for conquest alone, but for the soul of this realm and the honor that no fire, no betrayal, no number can ever extinguish." As the first hints of another false dawn touched the eastern sky, distant horns sounded once more, faint, ominous, carrying the promise of greater chaos, greater duels, and greater tests of loyalty yet to come. The city held its breath. The captains tightened their grips upon hilts and spears. And the epic struggle continued, unrelenting, through smoke and flame, honor and fate, marching forward into the unknown with the unbreaking will of men who had chosen justice over ease, light over shadow, and destiny over despair. The war was far from ended. It had merely entered its most profound and defining chapter, where the fires of yesterday would forge the victories or the legends of tomorrow. And somewhere in the gathering light, fate prepared its next judgment, while Orhan Sahib and his brothers stood vigilant, blades ready, hearts steadfast, ready to meet whatever storm the Almighty willed next upon the blood-soaked plains of honor. The twilight deepened into a heavy, starless night as the last echoes of the horde's retreating horns faded across the blood-drenched plains. Smoke still rose in lazy spirals from the smoldering wreckage outside the walls, carrying with it the acrid memory of fire, fear, and fallen ambitions. Orhan Sahib stood upon the eastern battlements, his shoulders squared against the weight of the day's slaughter, cloak torn and heavy with sweat and blood. The city below stirred with the fragile sounds of survival, wounded men groaning in the makeshift halls, women tending fires with trembling hands, children whispering prayers they had learned from their fathers' lips. Lanterns flickered like uncertain stars along the scarred parapets, illuminating faces etched with exhaustion yet illuminated by the quiet fire of hard-won defiance. Orhan approached first, his steps deliberate, the fresh wound on his shoulder bound tightly yet still seeping through the cloth like a reminder that loyalty always demanded its price. The northern riders have arrived, Orhan Sahib. Captain Raman's men stand true, and some of the frontier companies have returned to the fold, swearing renewed oaths upon the holy book. But others, a small contingent, slips among them like serpents in the grass. They carry the scent of Shahanshah's old court, whispers of poison, of hidden blades meant for your heart while the city rejoices. Palladios joined them moments later, wiping the edge of his blade with a scrap of cloth torn from a fallen enemy's banner. His eyes still carried the blaze of the street duels, the memory of the overlord's fall fresh upon his soul. The horde licks its wounds beyond the ridge. Their numbers are broken but not shattered. Perhaps 6,000 remain, regrouping under new chieftains who swear vengeance for the warlord you slew. They will not charge again tonight, but by dawn they may attempt to encircle fully and starve us. The fires we kindled in their rear still burn, yet desperation makes men cunning. Orhan Sahib turned slowly, his gaze sweeping over the gathered captains who had assembled in the torchlit square beneath the palace steps. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman stood shoulder to shoulder, their spears planted firmly as anchors of the western defense. Damir Khan rested his bow against his shoulder, quivers nearly empty but spirit unbroken. Tamir Boga and Mustafa conferred quietly near the river gate, their garments still damp from the night raids. Altuddin Sahib, Zarkin, Kulads, Kilul, Al-Aliuddin Sahib, and Jarkata Sahib formed the vigilant ring around the inner city, their eyes scanning every shadow for the final twist of betrayal. The turned horde riders waited at a respectful distance, their loyalty now tempered in the same fire that had tested everyone else. By the grace of the All-Seeing, who turns night into a veil for the righteous and reveals the hearts of men, Orhan Sahib intoned, his voice deep and rhythmic, carrying the solemn cadence of prayer blended with command. We have endured the storm of the day. The overlord lies among the ashes, his horde fractured by steel and smoke. The walls stand though scarred, and the people have seen that justice does not yield to numbers alone, yet the serpent's coils still twitch. The northern riders bring both reinforcement and possible poison. The horde waits in the darkness, plotting their next bite. We must secure what we have won before we strike outward once more. He descended to the square, where maps scavenged from the palace were spread upon a blood-stained table beneath a single shielded lantern. The captains leaned in as Orhan Sahib traced lines with the point of his dagger. Tarhan, take command of the northern gate with Raman's fresh spears. Interrogate every rider who claims loyalty, test their oaths with truth and steel if need be. Zarkin and Kulads, patrol the inner streets with them, let no shadow move unseen. Kilul and Al-Aliuddin Sahib, secure the granaries and wells, ration what remains so the people do not starve while we fight. Jarkata Sahib, your axe will guard the palace itself, watch for hidden passages or agents of the old regime. Mahmud and Abdul Rahman, reinforce the western wall and prepare traps of fire and stake for any renewed charge. Damir Khan, gather every arrow left and position your best marksmen at the highest points. Tamir Boga and Mustafa range the river under darkness,